Oita Prefecture, Japan. Famous Foods Overseas Planning Group meeting. A girl named Bonnie Hill has been asked to go on a blind date. The woman sitting next to her says she saw a man at church that she thinks Bonnie would hit it off with. He works for the company Bonnie works for. He has an attractive face, and there is a slight age difference between them. Kim Adams excitedly tells her that the man's father is a pharmacist and his mom is a professor. Admittedly, she feels a little sorry for his short stature. In her opinion, as far as potential suitors go, he's the best. Bonnie thanks Kim Adams for her concern, but she's fine. The woman doesn't understand why. After all, he's a good man, and Bonnie should definitely go out with him, at least once. Sitting across from them is Gemma Lee, and she tells Kim Adams that Bonnie Hill doesn't go on blind dates, especially if it's a date with a potential suitor. Yes, Bonnie actually has no plans to ever go on a blind date. What's more, she doesn't want to get married at all. Kim Adams is very surprised. She wonders if Bonnie won't even marry a celebrity. Smiling sweetly, Bonnie replied, "Yes, she is." Kim Adams decided to give a more realistic example. What about their principal? If it's going to be the same person as their principal, Bonnie still won't get married? Is she referring to Principal John Moore? Bonnie's not sure. It's true that the principal's looks and skills are amazing, but it's hard for her to judge a marriage based on those two qualities alone. Kim Adams thinks that if her future boyfriend has a face like the principal, she will marry him even if he goes bankrupt. Gemma Lee said that Bonnie could just walk out of work and have a man like the principal waiting for her at home. Bonnie reminded them that the principal was not an easy character. If she lived with someone like the principal, she wouldn't be able to handle it because she would feel so smothered. What did she say wrong? Why do they have such a strange expression on their faces? Oh, someone is standing with a bag behind Bonnie's back. That's gotta be him. Oh my God, it's Principal John Moore. I wonder how long he's been standing there watching. Bonnie hopes the principal didn't hear what she said. Joni Moore is here to inform them that they can use this place to have breakfast from 6:30 in the morning until 8:30 in the morning. 9 o'clock in the morning is required to assemble in the lobby, so he asked that the schedule not be disrupted. The principal has not come empty-handed. In his bag is a dessert from the most famous bakery in the neighborhood. The girls offered to eat the dessert all together, but the principal doesn't really like sweets. Joni Moore turned around and walked away, leaving them with the bag of sweets. Kim Adams and Gemma Lee can't believe the principal actually bought it for them. After all, they know that Joni Moore is not the kind of person who would be so considerate. The girls get up from the table to go for a swim in the hot springs. Gemma Lee has heard that the outdoor springs here are an art form. Kim Adams asked Bonnie if she wanted to go with them. She politely declined and decided to go rest in her room since she was starting to feel like she was getting sick. In fact, Bonnie's desire to go is off the charts, but she doesn't feel comfortable going to the spring with company. She decides she will go alone when everyone leaves. Kim Adams figures it out and says they'll see each other later then. Haha, that dessert is keeping Bonnie on her toes. Johnny Moore bought a dessert that Bonnie is incredibly fond of. Wait, you're on a diet! Bonnie thinks back to what she told Kim Adams and Gemma Lee about the principal. What if he overheard everything? Would he despise her because of it? After a while, Bonnie came to the spring. She stepped her foot into the water. The bliss is inexpressible. It's so cool. Bonnie loves it, especially since there's not a soul around. Oh, I think Bonnie heard something. Who could be here at sunrise but her? It's Principal Joni Moore. Bonnie is in unreal shock. But why did he come here? Bonnie is perplexed, but she is fascinated by what the principal is doing now. He has filled a pitcher of water and splashes it on his body. The water runs down his muscular, handsome body. Bonnie is thrilled. She is truly enjoying this. She certainly didn't think she would be here at this early hour to watch her boss with his bare torso pouring water on himself. Johnny Moore looked in Bonnie's direction. He himself is shocked to see her. They are both in an awkward situation. Johnny Moore doesn't understand what his subordinate Bonnie is doing here. She herself wonders what her boss is doing here. After all, according to her, this is the women's department. Turning away and covering his face with his hand, Johnny Moore replied that both men and women go to this bathhouse, but on different days. So yesterday, it was the women's section, and today, it was the men's section. He was surprised Bonnie didn't know that. How embarrassing for her, because he made her look like a complete fool. Bonnie apologized to her principal and said she would leave immediately. Right away, they heard other company employees nearby talking about the hot springs. The main thing is that no one should see them together like this. They think they would regret it if they left without coming all the way here to these hot springs. Bonnie's really worried. What was she going to do now? She looks around and ponders where she can hide. Joni Moore grabs her arm. Oh, that's unexpected. But he must have thought of something. The principal's taking her somewhere at an accelerated pace. He told her to just hide behind him for now and not make any noise. Bonnie thinks this is so nice and warm. The company employees notice the director and say hello to him. They don't understand why the director has that look on his face. The guys decide it's best to just ignore it, since Joni Moore doesn't like twaddle. Bonnie is glad she hasn't been noticed so far. By the way, director Joni Moore has quite a broad back and shoulders, apparently frequents the gym. Bonnie had definitely noticed that and liked it. She thought it wasn't exactly tactful to stare at her principal's body for so long and turned away. Bonnie can't wait for those two to leave because at this rate, SDA more people will come. The principal had picked up on the fact that these guys woke up pretty early. He told them that there is a trail around the neighborhood with beautiful scenery. That sounds intriguing. Joni Moore offered to go there together. He also had something to say to these two guys while they were out walking. One of them replied that they had just entered the water. At this point, the other guy lightly elbowed his coworker to shut up. Eventually, they agreed. Joni Moore told them to go first and suggested they meet at the main gate in 5 minutes. He asked Bonnie if she was okay. Yeah, of course she's fine. Just look at the look on her face. Haha. She's actually almost fainting. Johnny asked her to wait for him here for a while as he was going to go check on the situation, and he would be right back. He turned the other way, took a deep breath, and walked away. Bonnie thinks it's all because of her. After all, he wasn't able to enjoy the hot spring properly. She thinks she would be mad at herself if she were in her principal's shoes. A few minutes later, the principal returned and told Bonnie that no one was in right now. He asked her to put on her robe so she could go out. Bonnie grabbed the robe, and she was out of the place in a flash. Joni Moore did a great job of handling the situation. He did what a man should do. Bonnie was flustered and embarrassed, so she ran away. Most importantly, she realized she hadn't thanked her boss for saving her. Time passed and Bonnie, along with the rest of the company, returned home. Bonnie received a notification on her cell phone from Kelly with a text that read, "Have you arrived in Dallas yet?" Kelly is the only friend that Bonnie can tell all her true feelings to. She replied that she was already home. This is a girl she met on Instagram. Kelly is English and single. Bonnie knows nothing about her appearance except that she is a woman. All because there are no personal photos on Kelly's Instagram page. Pretty weird, but it happens. Bonnie texted her that she was really tired and wanted to go to bed. She fell asleep in a second. I wonder what kind of dreams she's having right now. Oh my God. I wish I hadn't asked that. She's dreaming about her principal with a naked torso. Bonnie wakes up terrified and doesn't know what to do. She's enjoying it too much. She can't think about anything but his body. Bonnie doesn't understand how he managed to get such a body. She thinks about what's below his abs. If this thing is really like this during normal times, what will it be like during... Bonnie, what are you even thinking about right now? The next day at work, the office of company director Joni Moore. Bonnie is very nervous before entering his office. She knocked on the door and heard Joni Moore say, "Come in." This man had become director of planning at such a young age. Bonnie said hello to him. Joni Moore opened his eyes and looked at her. You could see that Bonnie continued to worry. She brought in the new first-month sales report, placed the folder of reports on his desk. All Bonnie knows about her boss is that he works for a well-known American company, has a college degree, and prefers to wear suits. In addition, everyone is enamored with the fact that he is tall and has attractive looks. In her opinion, Joni Moore has a cynical demeanor. He is ruthlessly cold to subordinates who either lack skills or are slack. However, he has never demeaned or fired just based on his personal feelings. So, if Bonnie behaves normally and does her job well, she hopes she won't make him uncomfortable for the rest of her career. Bonnie pulls herself together and says she has something to say to her principal. He listens to her intently. Bonnie said that she never thanked him on the day of the seminar because she made Joni Moore very embarrassed in the outdoor bathtub. She's really sorry and she won't make that mistake again. Bonnie also said that thanks to her principal, she was able to prevent a much bigger incident. She is very grateful for his help. Johnny replied that there was no need to worry since he doesn't regret anything that happened that day. In his opinion, the person who should really be angry was Bonnie. He asked her not to worry about the past and just focus on her work. At this point, Bonnie thought about the fact that he tells her that everything is fine, yet he doesn't look her in the eye. Bonnie's sure he's holding a grudge. What? Bonnie, another one of your obscene fantasies. She doesn't understand why he's naked, but she's clearly enjoying it. Bonnie's mouth dropped open at the sight. She even thought she might have just gotten psychic powers or something. Joni Moore asked Bonnie if she had anything else to say to him. She replied, "No, nothing." Bonnie wanted to leave as soon as possible, as this situation had left her in shock. She abruptly closed the door behind her and ran away. Johnny Moore is either tired or remembering something. Oh, he must have gotten a blurry vision of Bonnie's naked body, too. That's interesting. It's driving Joni incredibly crazy. Does he think about her as much as she thinks about him? A short time later, Joni Moore and Bonnie met in the elevator. All Bonnie did was glance at her boss. Come on again? Bonnie, this is going to drive you crazy. Johnny Moore doesn't understand why she keeps looking at him like that. He gets close to Bonnie and threatens her that if she keeps looking at him like that, his patience will end. Bonnie wondered to Johnny exactly how she was looking at him. He blatantly replied that Bonnie looks at him like she wants him. Bonnie was surprised as she told him that she had never looked at him that way before. Oh my God, Johnny is crazy. He pushed her against the wall and kissed Bonnie passionately on the lips. He's her principal, after all, which embarrasses her. But Bonnie doesn't want to stop. She's really enjoying this. Oh, apparently the principal is on a roll. Bonnie tells her principal that he can't do it here. He says, really, can't we? Well, the thing is, it's not quite right, but the alarm clock rang and Bonnie woke up in her bed. I guess it was just a dream. I'm really sorry about Bonnie. Bonnie was really upset because she had counted on it all being real. She picked up her phone and turned off the alarm clock. Bonnie is upset because he still appears in her dreams. She doesn't know what's happening to her. She sees Johnny Moore's body everywhere. Bonnie is even angry about it. After a while, Bonnie arrived at work. On her lunch break, she went to the company cafeteria. She ordered an iced mocha with whipped cream. Bonnie's order was ready and she could pick up her mocha. A man stealthily crept up on her. It turned out to be Nelson. He offered to help her carry the tray of mocha. They approached the table and Nelson asked if he could sit next to her. Bonnie didn't mind. Nelson is a new employee who has been with the company for a month. He's the new dark horse who has eclipsed the director's unique popularity. He told me in confidence that he always drinks Americano and asked me not to tell anyone about it. By the way, Nelson is being watched by Bonnie, so he's trying to get closer to her. Bonnie finally realizes why her colleagues are so enthusiastic, because the main thing is to move up the ladder by any means necessary. Nelson sees the principal through the window. Joni Moore apparently returns after having lunch. Bonnie replied, "Yes, that seems to be the case." She almost chokes on her mocha. As soon as Bonnie sees her boss, she imagines him without clothes. It's become the norm. Sometimes she thinks she needs to see a doctor. At that moment, she heard Nelson say that the principal has a big one. Bonnie responded in shock with a, "What?" Apparently, she misunderstood him. Nelson is talking about the principal's height. It's unusual for someone to have such a small face and such a height. Bonnie doesn't think that's the only thing about him that matters. Nelson looks intently at Bonnie and asks her if she has a boyfriend. She replied that she didn't have a boyfriend. But why? Bonnie doesn't understand why he wants this information. Nelson thinks it's strange that a pretty girl like Bonnie doesn't have a boyfriend. Bonnie thinks he's a womanizer. Nelson asks her, "You think I'm a womanizer, right?" She looked away and thought about the fact that he's even good at picking on people. Bonnie looked at her boss again. What was this? Was it just her imagination? She thinks it looks like Joni Moore just looked at her. The workday has come to an end and Bonnie is getting ready to go home. She waits for the elevator to come to her. The doors open and she is slightly surprised at what she sees. In the elevator is Johnny Moore, who doesn't understand why Bonnie is standing still and not getting in. The thing is, Bonnie was avoiding him on purpose so she wouldn't accidentally bump into him. Looking at her boss, all she could think about was why exactly he was supposed to be in that elevator. Well, as they say, accidents don't happen by accident. Everyone remembers Bonnie's dream, right? Yeah, she was getting a little hot in those dreams herself. Johnny Moore asks Bonnie which side of the conversation her house is on. She was shocked that he had even asked such a question. Bonnie replied that she lived in the Preston Highlands neighborhood. Joni said, "Since we're going one way." At that moment, the elevator doors opened on the 7th floor. A crowd of employees began to enter the elevator. Oh, they would just crush them. The elevator doors closed and Bonnie was pressed right up against the body of her boss. Embarrassed, she even closed her eyes. Phew. Finally, the 1st floor and Bonnie got off the elevator. She told her principal, "See you tomorrow." Lightning fast, she ran quickly away from work. A few days later, damn, it was that dream again. After all, it's been a week, but the dreams are still about the same thing. What should she do? She doesn't think she can ask for advice on something like this. Oh, wait, she does have her Instagram friend. Bonnie texts Kelly about her problem, telling her everything in detail. She thinks it might be because she hasn't had intimacy in a while. Kelly doesn't think that's likely. So what's going on with Bonnie? Looks like Bonnie has a crush on her boss. No, she's in love with his body. Bonnie almost choked on her food reading that. She doesn't understand. How does that happen? How can you only fall in love with a man's body? Kelly doesn't think Bonnie should be embarrassed about it, since every person is attracted to certain things about others. Some like a face and some like a personality, well, or like Bonnie likes a nice pumped-up body. Bonnie starts to think about how this makes sense. Kelly is convinced that the case with this guy needs to be given a go-ahead. Earlier, Bonnie said she couldn't decide to get serious after breaking up with that mama's boy of hers. Mama's boy? That's the jerk who made her stop believing in marriage and become a misogamist. Who knows? Maybe Johnny Moore is her destiny. Who knows if Johnny Moore is her destiny? Bonnie writes to Kelly about how she doesn't even have the thought of getting into a serious relationship. Kelly recommends that she not push herself and start simple, like her boss's muscular body, because Bonnie likes his body, right? At that corporate event, fate has assigned seats and Bonnie finds herself at the table, which can only be described in one word: fail. That's because her manager Matthew Finch was sitting across from her. Manager Matthew Finch is a man who always gets drunk at corporate parties like it's the last time, and that would be okay if he was getting drunk alone. He asked Bonnie why she wasn't drinking. It's been an hour since he poured her a drink. Mr. Matthew Finch was a problem because he was always pouring for everyone sitting around him. Bonnie pretended to drink, but Matthew Finch noticed this and he asked her why she was pretending. Was it because Bonnie didn't like the alcohol he was pouring? After some thought, Bonnie decided she had to drink it, and she drank it down. All of this happened because of one man, whose name was Johnny Moore. She was kind of embarrassed to bump into him after the incident. But after Bonnie got advice from Kelly, the whole situation became more uncomfortable. It was because Bonnie was trying to sit away from him that she found herself sitting at the same table as her manager, Matthew Finch. And her boss is doing fine, only Bonnie is suffering. It seemed to Matthew Finch that Bonnie could drink. He suggests another round of drinks. She is thinking that she needs to get out of here as soon as possible. Bonnie told Matthew Finch that she was a little drunk and needed to go out for some air. Johnny Moore notices Bonnie rushing for the exit. She went outside. Bonnie thinks it is necessary to wait it out here and come back when everyone is dispersing. She read what Kelly wrote to her about Bonnie needing to be honest with herself and figure out how she feels about this guy. But what does honest mean? That Bonnie is in love with his body? That she dreams about him all the time and doesn't know what to do about it? Some man stopped next to her. It turns out to be Principal Johnny Moore, but what is he doing here? Bonnie thinks he must have gone out for a smoke. Does he even smoke? Joni tells her that she's had a lot to drink and it's better to go home now. Bonnie realizes that she's probably drunk. She looks at her principal and sees that he doesn't look scared. She wonders frantically, what does it feel like to be hugged by such strong arms? What does it feel like to touch your face against this body? Oh God, there she goes again. Bonnie feels it's necessary to say something to the principal. Since she's pretty drunk, she might say a lot of unnecessary things to her boss right now. Wow. She asks Johnny Moore if he'd like to sleep with her once. That's a bit of a surprise to him. The reason Bonnie actually started this conversation is because she doesn't think the principal has anyone, and it's been a while since she broke up with that asshole. She means the previous man. Bonnie blushed and got embarrassed, but said it would be great if she and Johnny Moore could brighten up their time together. Bonnie doesn't realize what she's saying right now, or is it the alcohol speaking for her? She contemplates saying she was joking before it's too late. She ends up saying that she's not in the mood for a serious relationship with him anyway, so nothing should weigh on the boss. And Bonnie won't have a problem with that. She's not vindictive. She's reassuring that they'll just stop after one time, like it never happened. Johnny Moore addressed Bonnie by name. At that moment, Bonnie flinched. Johnny Moore, like a real man, replied that he would only do it with the woman he was marrying, and then only after the wedding, especially if it was only a one-night stand. Bonnie didn't understand what that meant. One of the female employees shouted out, asking who else wanted a drink. Johnny Moore said it was time for him to leave. Before he left, he looked Bonnie in the eye. She's speechless. She doesn't know how to react. Eventually, the principal left. At that moment, Bonnie realized that she seems to have sobered up. She's ashamed of what she said to him. After a while, Johnny Moore arrived home and decided to take a shower. He closed the water faucet, took a towel to wipe his body, put on his robe and went out into the living room. Joni was a little tired from the recent partying. He thought about something for a moment. At that moment, someone called his phone. He said he would be going to bed soon and asked someone if he was taking his medication on time. Who's he talking to? We don't know that yet. Joni finally told his contact to take care of his health no matter where he was, and ended the conversation. Could it be a mom or a dad or some girl? He wanted to go to sleep, but those thoughts in his head were bothering him. Joni thinks about Bonnie all the time, even remembers her voice. He's not going to sleep now, that's for sure. The next day, Bonnie was really hoping the workday wouldn't come. All she does is think back to yesterday when she said such stupid things to her boss. Bonnie thinks she'll regret it for the rest of her life. She's so ashamed. Anyway, she was honest at the time. Also, Bonnie thinks she would have been satisfied with even one time with the principal. He was so menacing at that moment when he said he would only do it with the woman he would marry. Bonnie doesn't understand why he said that. Perhaps Johnny Moore has a girl he wants to marry? Or is this his way of telling Bonnie that he doesn't want to sleep with her? She's ashamed to look her boss in the face now. Unbeknownst to Bonnie, Nelson had crept up behind her. He overheard Bonnie talking to herself about not being able to look someone in the face. Is he going to scare her like that all the time now? Nelson got to work early and was bored for those 20 minutes. He looked at Bonnie's face and concluded that she must have been up all night. Is it that obvious? Apparently so, since she has huge circles under her eyes. But still, Nelson thinks Bonnie's still a hottie with that look. First offended her, then cheered her up. She asked Nelson if the boss was still at work. No, he's not here yet. He wondered why Bonnie was asking that. Nelson assumed it was because she was afraid she might get fired. What a quick-witted guy. He hints to Bonnie that if she has any problems at work, just have her let him know, since he thinks Bonnie would feel better if she talked to someone. But how can she tell him that she was rejected by the principal after offering to sleep with him? Nelson doesn't have as much experience in terms of work as Bonnie, but certainly more experience in dealing with others. It just so happens that he's had to socialize with all kinds of people since he was a kid. Nelson thinks that will come in handy, and if Bonnie needs help, let him know. To cheer Bonnie up in some way, he put one candy on the table for her. Oh, this candy is chocolate. Bonnie doesn't understand, since Nelson isn't a kid, but he still carries around chocolate candy. He replies that he is still a kid, and she will feel better if she eats this candy. Nelson doesn't know what's going on with her, but recommends that she stop getting upset. Bonnie thanked Nelson for giving her the chocolate candy. The door opened and the director walked in. Everyone in the company who saw him started to say hello to him. Nelson, in addition to saying hello to the director, also bowed to him. Bonnie froze in place. Johnny Moore is excellent as always. Bonnie also bowed and said hello to the principal. She felt uncomfortable looking Johnny Moore in the eye. He too looked her in the eye, but as if with some contempt. At that moment, a slight chill ran down Bonnie's back. Johnny Moore turned around and went to his office. At that moment, Bonnie became saddened. Nelson thinks their principal is definitely an unapproachable man. Like something would happen if he smiled. He wondered, does Johnny Moore and his girlfriend act like that too? Bonnie was surprised since she didn't know the principal possibly had a girlfriend. A couple of days ago, Nelson happened to meet Johnny Moore at the mall. He was in a jewelry store. Nelson could clearly see what his boss had purchased. Johnny had purchased a gold pendant with stones that was most likely intended for a young girl. Nelson is convinced that a man would never give a woman a pendant with stones if she means nothing to him. There is only one option. He is convinced that Johnny Moore has someone. Bonnie came into the principal's office. She apologized to her boss. She was very drunk last night and made a huge mistake in her opinion. Bonnie asks him to forget what she said to him last night. Johnny replies that he is in no position to forget it. How can you forget something like that? It's not a joke, it's a night together. Bonnie is ashamed. She says the words came out on their own because she was drunk. She genuinely realizes that she made the principal very uncomfortable. Johnny Moore has come to the conclusion that Bonnie says things like that to everyone when she's drunk. She didn't expect to hear that from her boss. Bonnie vehemently denies it. It never happened, no matter how drunk she was. She assures her boss that it will never happen again. That may sound like an excuse, but Bonnie's not an easy one. She doesn't want to be mistaken for someone who molests everyone when she's drunk. Bonnie swears it's the first time it's ever happened. Johnny Moore listened to Bonnie and looked intently into her eyes. He believed her, since he knows Bonnie is not that kind of person. At this point, Bonnie blushed. She thanked her boss for understanding. Bonnie was about to leave, but the principal stopped her. She didn't understand why exactly. Johnny Moore asked Bonnie if she had any plans for the evening. No, she didn't have any plans for tonight. Great. Then they'll have dinner together. Johnny suggested they meet after work. At that moment, Bonnie tensed up. Dinner together and just the two of them? Not bad. But there was a catch. Her former boss, before firing her subordinate, had invited him to dinner at an expensive restaurant. So Bonnie got really stressed out and worked herself up into a tizzy. Bonnie thinks that maybe Johnny Moore wants to fire her because she asked him to sleep with her. He thought it was like she didn't like the sushi, since she never touched her food. No, she really likes sushi, she just doesn't eat it very often. Bonnie seemed to melt from the incredibly delicious sushi. It was her first time at this restaurant, but she thinks it's so popular for a reason. Bonnie looked her boss in the eye and blushed at the sight of him looking at her. Maybe she'd done something wrong? No, it's fine, Joni Moore replied. She asked the logical question, so why was he looking at her like that? Joni didn't immediately realize the point. What look? That look. Bonnie thinks he's giving her that tender look. Bonnie must be under a lot of stress lately because she's having more and more stupid thoughts. On the table are cups of flavored tea and delicious cookies that Bonnie hasn't eaten yet. And all because she wants to find out from her boss why he invited her here? It's very important for her to know. The thing is, Joni Moore likes Joni. Bonnie didn't realize that. Excuse me? Because he likes sushi. Joni really wanted to eat sushi, but he just didn't have anyone to eat it with. Bonnie calmed down, since all he needed was someone to go out to dinner with. It was only dinner. He only wanted to share that dinner with Bonnie, so there's no need to overcomplicate it. After the restaurant, Johnny Moore drives Bonnie home in his car. She never imagined the day would come when she would be sitting in the same car with her boss. Bonnie would have been able to get home on her own, but it was so hard for her to say no to him. I guess everything a handsome man does looks handsome. Every move he makes is so confident. By the way, in the very dream Bonnie had had a couple days ago, they were sitting in the car too. Their hands were intertwined tightly. They were savoring every moment they spent together. Joni was kissing her on the lips like she was the love of his life. Hey Bonnie, come back to reality, stop daydreaming. Joni wondered why Bonnie was so freaked out. He dropped her off in front of the house and it's pouring rain outside. Yeah, the weather's not great. Bonnie got out of the car. Johnny Moore walked up to her and pulled out an umbrella to keep her dry from the rain. He offers to walk her home since he is worried that Bonnie might catch a cold without an umbrella. She replies that there's no need to worry. She's perfectly capable of walking home on her own. But Joni insists on walking her home after all. Bonnie, stop turning down your boss's offers. He's taken care of you, and he's taken care of you repeatedly. It's really bad weather out there. Once again, Johnny Moore is acting like a real man. Bonnie feels like she's being escorted out after a date. Maybe he has something else to say to her? She warned Joni Moore that if there was anything he wanted to ask or say, he could do it right now. Bonnie squeezed her bag strap and added that if this was all about last night's party, then, at that point, Johnny Moore interrupted her and replied that if he remembered correctly, he'd said he wouldn't touch the subject again. So he had nothing more to say to Bonnie then? Joni thought for a moment and asked her what she thought about the wedding. Bonnie wondered why he was talking about the wedding all of a sudden. She asked him a direct question. Why did he start talking about the wedding so suddenly? Joni replied that Bonnie herself had said that he could ask about anything. Bonnie believes that a wedding is always seen as a blessing, and everyone says that marriage is an opportunity to acquire a new family member. People who love each other live together until death do them part. They are sure to trust and take care of each other till the very end. Isn't that the perfect marriage that everyone wants and believes in? Bonnie, however, believes it is only a fairy tale. She recalls moments from her childhood, broken liquor bottles, and the constant scandals of her parents. For the protagonists of a fairy tale, it's always a happy ending. Only these are just dreams invented by people. What lies behind this rainbow facade? If you look into the essence and put aside all the beautiful words, you can see something else. I'm sorry, we should break up. That promised love will be over in a few years, and then you'll just be passers-by for each other. You can see that Bonnie is in a lot of pain from the memories. By the way, she has no naive fantasies about marriage. Joni Moore hopes that one day Bonnie will change her mind. She doesn't quite understand in what way. What if one day the right man comes into her life, the one she can't push away? Bonnie is sure that even then she won't marry that man, and no matter how wonderful he is. Joni thinks time will tell. No need to jump to conclusions. Bonnie thanked the principal for walking her home. She asked him to be careful on the way back. Bonnie stepped to the threshold, but she was called out by Johnny Moore. He repeated what Bonnie had told him earlier about the marriage. Marriage really isn't as romantic and beautiful as it may seem. But Joni believes that not every marriage ends in failure. Some people see value in married life. That may be true, but Bonnie is sure that's not her story. But why does she think that? Johnny Moore has no idea why Bonnie hates the idea of marriage so much, but he's sure the one she needs will show up in due time. The man who will find the way to Bonnie's heart. A man who will truly love. Hearing those words, Bonnie clutched the strap of her bag. She told Joni that he was saying it so confidently. Because he's really sure of it. Johnny Moore thinks he can be that man for her. The next day at work. The workday is finally coming to an end and Bonnie has completed all the tasks. Looks like the principal left work early today. Nothing has changed since that day. He's acting the same as before. Except in Bonnie's dreams, he's acting more romantic. It's getting harder and harder for her to look him in the eye. Lobby, first floor. Bonnie is annoyed that it's raining outside. She hopes that the rain will stop soon. She recalls Joni Moore's words, "A man who will truly love her." Because of the rain, she couldn't hear what he said at the very end. Oh, Bonnie had a bus to catch. She rushes as fast as she can to the bus. She also didn't have her umbrella with her. She spotted someone. It's her ex-boyfriend Andrew, and he's sitting in a cafe with some girl. What a meeting. Bonnie got so caught up in it that she didn't catch her bus. That afternoon, Andrew tells her that they need to break up. He's not sure he could marry her. But Bonnie is outraged since their parents met a couple days ago. What happened? Andrew blatantly told her that his mom doesn't think he should marry Bonnie. What? I mean, they've already picked out the banquet hall and the wedding outfits. Does Andrew want to tell Bonnie that his mom is running his life? Bonnie thinks he should be the one to choose who he marries and who he spends the rest of his days with. Andrew responds that he shouldn't get involved with a person disappointed by his parents. He is sure that there is no such thing as a love marriage, and it is necessary to listen to the family. At this point, Bonnie's tears flowed. People at other tables noticed the couple arguing. Andrew has become uncomfortable with the fact that they are being noticed, and plus Bonnie is crying. She doesn't understand why. Is her family not good enough for their family? Is that why Andrew can't marry Bonnie? Because she grew up without a mother? Or maybe because her father is an alcoholic? Andrew reminded Bonnie that she had previously told him that she wasn't sure if she could be a good mother because of growing up without one herself. He was very worried that she wouldn't be able to cope and take care of a future child. Yes, Bonnie did have those thoughts, but only she thought she could overcome everything if Andrew was there for her. Andrew's mother is probably worried about that very thing, and of course she was disappointed to meet Bonnie's father. Andrew asked Bonnie if she were in his mother's shoes. Would she want to let her child go to a family like that? He apologized to Bonnie. Andrew still loves her. However, his mom has already made up her mind and there's nothing he can do about it. Is this really someone Bonnie has grown to love so much that she has decided to marry him? Her hands were shaking very badly. Andrew squeezes her hands and says he realizes this is all unexpected, but he asks to be realistic as it is too late to change his mom's mind. Bonnie was angry with him. She answered him not to use his own mother as an excuse. Since he loves his mommy so much, let him marry her, you mama's boy. Andrew was stunned at those words. What? A mama's boy? Bonnie had warned him to never from now on. Never dare he come into her life. She walked out of the cafe and wanted to forget about Andrew forever. That day she made a promise to herself. Never to believe in everlasting love. To never commit her life to anyone. Never to marry. That woman was probably raised in a good family. The perfect wife that everyone dreams of. The woman who can create a happy family and raise a child. Bonnie feels like a jerk. No, you're not. That's when Andrew looked out the window. He was breathless at the sight of Bonnie. Did he think she was peeking in on their date? Bonnie decided it was imperative to get out of here as soon as possible. Turning around, she ran into her boss. By the way, Bonnie has very pretty eyes. Joni Moore wondered why she wasn't watching the weather forecast. She replied that she was the kind of person who didn't believe in weather forecasts. Bonnie never thought she would be in that car again. Bonnie asked the principal if he left work on time today. Yes, he did. Except that Johnny Moore had forgotten something in the office and happened to meet Bonnie on his way back. She thanked him for giving her a ride home. Bonnie feels indebted to him. If only she hadn't met Andrew's eyes, she wouldn't be riding with the principal in his car right now. Calming herself down, Bonnie is only in that car because she didn't want Andrew to see her so insignificant, running away and soaking wet in the rain. Bonnie thinks it's unfair that she's having trouble believing in love, and the bastard is already dating another girl like nothing ever happened. He seemed happier even than when they first met. Would Bonnie ever get over this feeling? It would be nice if she had a drink with a friend right now. But there's one problem. Everyone is either married or with kids. Bonnie decided that the best option was to have a can of beer at home. Joni asked her if perhaps she needed to be home by a certain hour, a curfew, at her age. In that case, Joni suggested she stop somewhere for a drink. They went into an upscale local bar. They ordered themselves alcoholic drinks. The bartender poured first for Joni Moore and then for Bonnie. He took the glass and began to savor the drink. Bonnie watched the process. Joni Moore wondered why she was looking at him but not drinking herself. Eventually, Bonnie decided that it was time for her to have a drink too. Johnny Moore smiled and told her to take her time, as no one would dare to take away her drink. Bonnie doesn't understand why he's smiling like that. The bartender asked if she wanted another drink. Bonnie said yes. The order will be ready in a minute. Bonnie wonders why the boss asked her out of the blue. The thing is, he wanted a drink but had no one to call. It was the same last time. He said he didn't have anyone to go to the sushi bar with. Bonnie thinks it's weird that such a handsome guy didn't have someone to go out for a drink or a meal with. She shouldn't be looking for some other meaning in that, but Bonnie remembered Nelson's words. There's only one option here. I'm sure the chief has a girlfriend. Bonnie asked the direct question, why can't the principal have a drink with his girlfriend? Girlfriend? He didn't even know he had one. Bonnie hadn't expected the fact that he didn't have a girlfriend. After all, she seriously thought the principal had a girlfriend. Then what about what Nelson said? He definitely said that the principal was buying a pendant with stones for a young girl. But maybe Johnny Moore really doesn't have a fiancé. He asked if Bonnie would be interested in knowing the truth. About whether he had a girlfriend? Not that she'd be interested, it's not like it matters if she knows or not. Come on, of course she'd be very interested. Bonnie drank her cocktail in one gulp because of her excitement. Johnny Moore had warned her that just because what's in the glass tastes like coffee doesn't mean you should drink it like it is. This was her fourth glass, and the degree of this cocktail was pretty high. Bonnie calmed him down and told him not to worry. She won't get drunk off the cocktail. What is she looking at? Oh my God, Bonnie, you're already drunk. She feels like she's intoxicated. Bonnie decided to go to the bathroom. Oh no, she fell! What a sweet and fresh scent. So familiar. Bonnie had smelled it somewhere before. That's right, it's the boss's cologne. And there he is. Bonnie doesn't understand what he's doing in her room. Johnny Moore asked her if she was okay. He was very worried about her since she hadn't woken up in a long time. He tried several times to wake her up. Johnny Moore was going to leave several times once Bonnie was safe, but she collapsed right in front of the front door. Bonnie thinks it sounds like a dream, especially since he can't be in her room. It's definitely a dream. She asked Johnny why is he wearing clothes today. Johnny Moore was surprised at such a question. Bonnie, deciding it was a dream, asked her boss if he was going to undress now. Sighing, Johnny replied that it would be better to talk tomorrow when Bonnie was better. Johnny hesitated. Bonnie, deciding that it was a dream, decided to be proactive. She reached for him with her hand, grabbed her boss by the shoulder, and threw him down on the bed. Honestly, he was in unreal shock. Bonnie sat on top of him. Wow, what a moment! Bonnie was surprised that Johnny Moore was so timid tonight. After all, in her other dreams he was incredibly passionate. Bonnie, are you taking off your clothes? She threw her clothes off on the floor. Bonnie, what are you doing? Are you out of your mind? She told her boss she was going to help him undress. Bonnie, when you sober up, you're going to regret it. You're going to be ashamed. But she's confident in her actions. Bonnie unbuttons his shirt. Johnny Moore grabs her hand and thinks it's time to stop. Otherwise, he won't vouch for himself. Bonnie asks Johnny if he doesn't like it. It's very hard for him to admit it, but he is practically unable to resist Bonnie. Johnny grabs her and flipped Bonnie onto her back. All he wants to know is, what does she want from him? There must be a reason why she's having these dreams. Johnny Moore asked Bonnie to tell him that. He runs his finger over her lip and begs her to tell him the truth. Bonnie is madly in love with her boss. Oh my God, so they have no way out. Johnny can barely contain himself either. He takes off his jacket and leans into Bonnie. His hand goes higher and higher up Bonnie's body. Passions are running high, and he's going to do this to her all night until Ine starts begging him to stop. Although no, he won't stop even then. There's just one little but before they enjoy their lovemaking to the fullest. Johnny Moore is proposing marriage before they sleep together. What? Really? Bonnie woke up to those words. What wedding? Bonnie's face is blank after that offer. Johnny has previously told her that he would only sleep with the woman he shares his life with. Bonnie doesn't get it. He told her he doesn't have a fiancée, but apparently Bonnie misunderstood him. He'll only sleep with the woman he marries. If the principal's single, does that mean he hasn't slept with any women? Bonnie's head is spinning with this whole thing. Is he trying to tell her that he's keeping his virginity? That can't be right. Johnny Moore looks stunning and easily attracts the eyes of the girls. This is a man who could have dozens of women at the snap of his fingers. He replied that he is. He is a virgin. Wow, that's some news. To all of this, Bonnie replied that if these excuses are just because he doesn't want to make love, then he shouldn't go that far. He has nothing more to say. So it's true? It's really hard to believe. Bonnie is incredibly shocked by this information. Johnny Moore has never slept with a girl, and it's the truth. That's some stamina for a man, wow. He moved closer to Bonnie and asked her a question. Would she agree to marry him? Realistically? I mean, there's no reason for her to marry Johnny Moore. First of all, marriage isn't a joke. It's a serious step, and secondly, she's a non-monogamist. Non-monogamists prefer to live their entire lives alone. Joni realized this and decided it was time for him to leave. He just asked Bonnie to let him know if she changed her beliefs. He buttoned his shirt and headed for the exit. Lastly, he said, "We'll continue when you're ready." The next day at work, Bonnie walked into the coffee shop with her co-workers. The girls are discussing the love show that kept them awake last night. If only they knew what kept Bonnie awake last night. Bonnie noticed that the principal was down at the cafe too. Bonnie's co-workers emphasized that their boss looks good today. They think he looks better than some celebrities, and it would be nice if he was a little more affable. Kim Adams really likes Johnny Moore's muscular body. By the way, Gemma Lee loves him too. They are insanely curious who the lucky girl who will marry him is. Kim Adams thinks it's certainly none of them. Bonnie recalls Joni saying that he told her he would only sleep with the woman he would share his life with. Apparently Bonnie has given his proposal some thought. The principal isn't just a man of honor. He hasn't had anyone yet. It's something mind-boggling. In Bonnie's opinion, this image in no way matches his state of mind. Joni had told her he would do this to her all night, until she begged him to stop. That feels like two different people. Bonnie still couldn't believe it. She stands up abruptly and tells the girls she has to go. Bonnie must have rubbed a hole in him by now, just staring at him. As an excuse, she told her co-workers that she had something to do and to take their time going to their workplace. Johnny Moore noticed Bonnie leaving the cafe. A few days later, Bonnie barely dragged herself down the hallway, sighing languidly. She was really scared. Bonnie saw her boss come out of the elevator with the other employees of the company. He didn't seem to have noticed her yet. She started looking around for somewhere to hide in an emergency. She opened the first door she could find. But she can't avoid him all the time. Except that every time Bonnie sees him, memories of that night flash through her mind. She's incredibly scared to face him. Bonnie decides that it looks like he's already gone. It's safe to come out. What a surprise! She opened the door and bumped into her boss. A cold sweat broke out on Bonnie's face. She screamed with all her might that the whole office heard her scream. Johnny Moore closed the door to that room so no one would overhear. He wants to understand why Bonnie keeps avoiding him. Bonnie, like a little girl, decided to answer that Johnny Moore made it all up. She never avoids her principal. It's as if the warden has Bonnie cornered and asked her to tell only the truth. He wonders if she's thought about his proposal yet. Bonnie pretends not to know what he's talking about. He means about marrying him. Bonnie doesn't know what to say to her boss. At that moment, a chill runs down her spine. He's joking, right? But Johnny Moore never jokes about anything like that. Looks like she needs to answer Johnny Moore something either way. Bonnie started talking about how marriage is not a joke. It's not a dinner out. It's a big decision. Well, he decided to give her more time to think about it. But Bonnie stands her ground and won't budge from her principles, even if he gives her more time. But still, she feels something different about him. But she doesn't want to get into a serious relationship with him. Bonnie's convinced that Johnny Moore just doesn't get her. If it's because of what Bonnie said that night, she was out of it because she was drunk. She never wanted a serious relationship with her boss. Johnny Moore seems to think that Bonnie is in a serious relationship with him every night if you take into account her dreams. He believes that there is no reason to feel uncomfortable. A person's desire to build a relationship is a basic human instinct. It's normal. It just shows how important they are to each other. Humans are social creatures. Laws and systems are invented for a reason. This looks like a presentation. Johnny Moore speaking as if behind a podium, saying that if everyone behaved as they wanted just to satisfy their desires, then what's the difference between a human and an animal? Bonnie generally agrees with Johnny. Apparently, she was influenced by his powers of persuasion. After finishing his speech, Johnny Moore grabbed the document in his hands and asked her if she might finally want to marry him. Bonnie is amazed that every conversation they have ends with a marriage proposal. It doesn't matter to her how much she wants Johnny. It's not enough for her to marry him. Besides, Bonnie has already said that she doesn't believe in marriage. She has no plans to marry Johnny or anyone else. Johnny Moore realizes that she won't agree to the wedding that easily. He knows that Bonnie has a negative attitude toward marriage. Except Johnny can't get her words out of his head that she wants him. He can't pass up this chance. It's not that Bonnie isn't at all interested, and even despite all her negative attitude, but Johnny Moore will make her change her mind. Kelly texts Bonnie about how she's doing with that guy she's been dreaming about. Can Bonnie tell her? Although Kelly certainly doesn't know Johnny Moore and she's not likely to gossip about it. Bonnie starts writing her a long message telling her the latest events that happened that very night. She writes the message quite long so as not to leave anything out. Eventually, Kelly reads the message from Bonnie and is horrified to learn that Johnny Moore is a virgin. Kelly doesn't understand how he could have rejected Bonnie, but it wasn't quite like that. She also thought at first that Johnny didn't want her, but he really doesn't sleep with anyone specifically until after the wedding. Kelly can't believe men like that even exist. She's seen a study somewhere that says there's about 1% of men like that in America. She thinks it's probably impossible to have a relationship with him without getting married. But Bonnie said she'd never get married. Who would have thought that the man who would stir Bonnie's heart would be someone who denies intimacy outside of marriage? What a mockery of fate. Bonnie thinks the heavens themselves must be telling her it's not her destiny to be with him. Maybe it's for the best. What if she had accepted his proposal and spent the night with him? The situation would have been even more awkward. She decided it wasn't worth crossing that line. It would be better to just forget the whole thing. Bonnie has turned off the lights in the room and is about to fall asleep. But her thoughts keep her from falling asleep. In her head is the voice of Johnny Moore saying, "You're going to change your mind. I'm going to make you change your mind." What was in his head when he said that? Bonnie better not think about it and stop obsessing over her boss. The next day at work, Nelson wonders what happened at Bonnie's. Since Bonnie looks like she has a lot of problems. This guy is pretty savvy. She replies that it's just disturbing dreams. Nelson now wonders what her dreams are about. Ha ha. Bonnie blushed with embarrassment. It's not like she's going to tell him she's dreaming about her naked boss. Bonnie decided to mimic with her hands what she was dreaming about. Nelson realized she must be having nightmares. Not exactly. Explaining in simple words, Bonnie said that the person she was dreaming about was someone she didn't want to see, and he kept appearing in her dreams. Nelson concluded from her words that if it's someone she doesn't want to see, Bonnie is probably jealous of that person. But she doesn't have any hostile thoughts towards that person. Although, come to think of it, before that incident in the hot springs, the principal was just a problematic boss. But over the past few days, Bonnie had seen him in a different light. It seems Johnny Moore is better than she thought he was. Nelson wondered who the man was. At that moment, Bonnie received a message from the principal waiting for her with her prepared reports in his office. A few minutes later, Bonnie arrived at the principal's office. Johnny Moore allows her to enter as he is very interested in the counts that Bonnie has prepared. He scrutinizes those readings. Bonnie seems to have detailed everything. Did she make some kind of mistake? No, everything is in order. Johnny Moore thanked Bonnie for the work she had done. She was pleased that she had done it right. Johnny Moore has something to ask her, as it seems that Bonnie is pretty close to Nelson. He has seen the two of them together on numerous occasions. Since Bonnie was in charge of training when Nelson joined the company, she thinks he's closer to her than other co-workers. However, Johnny Moore himself appointed her as Nelson's trainer. Johnny Moore was surprised that he had personally given such an instruction to Bonnie. He took a deep breath and thought about the hole he had dug for himself. Johnny asked him to ignore him and asked Bonnie if she had time to eat dinner tonight. No, she already had plans for tonight. Then how about tomorrow? Bonnie replied that she had plans tomorrow too. Apparently after tomorrow she has plans too. Johnny Moore asked a specific question. Does she like him? Bonnie worriedly replied that who would ask a man to sleep with her twice if she didn't have any feelings? Johnny Moore thought the first time it was the effects of alcohol. The second time it was no longer a coincidence. He believes that Bonnie genuinely wanted him and her outlook has changed lately. She looks at Johnny differently. At this point, Bonnie hesitates. Had Johnny Moore really gotten it all wrong? Was this whole thing a mistake? It's not that Bonnie hates him, but she doesn't love him. She only wants to sleep with him once, but certainly not to marry him. Bonnie doesn't know how to tell him about these doubts. It seems that Bonnie herself has stirred up these strange feelings and has taken it too far. In theory, it was all easy. In reality, it was just not feasible. Johnny Moore reached out his hand to touch Bonnie's arm, but she pulled it away. Well, then he would wait until she agreed to have dinner with him. He promises not to do anything until then, so Johnny Moore asked Bonnie to stop avoiding him. Back home, Bonnie started packing her things in her suitcase. She is going on an overseas business trip tomorrow with the man she was going to avoid. They would have to spend 4 days and 3 nights together. It's hot in Singapore, isn't it? Bonnie wants to bring a dress. Although no, it's only a business trip. A dress is too much. I wonder what kind of dress Johnny Moore would like. Did she just really think of that? Bonnie recalls his words. Do you hate me? I'll wait. I'll wait until you agree to have dinner with me. She decided to text her friend Kelly. Bonnie writes that she doesn't know what Johnny has in mind. Kelly suggests that maybe Johnny Moore has some intimacy issues, since they haven't slept together, and he wants to get married right away. I don't think that's true. If not, then maybe he really does want to marry Bonnie. Kelly is sure that's always the case with men. If Johnny Moore really likes Bonnie, He'll want to marry her first and foremost, not sleep with her. Bonnie is surprised because of the fact that if he really likes her, then how can he hold back? How can he push away the woman he wants? Kelly reminded Bonnie that people are attracted to different things. They'd never really talked before the hot spring situation, and Bonnie had never flirted with him, never even been nice to him. In her opinion, Johnny Moore just couldn't fall in love with her for what she thought was no reason. Kelly recommended that Bonnie, instead of trying to find out what was in his head, better for her to figure out how she felt. Figure out exactly what kind of relationship Bonnie wanted with this man. Bonnie sighed heavily and collapsed onto her mountain of scattered belongings. The day has come when they have to leave for Singapore. Bonnie and Johnny Moore sit next to each other, but you can see how tense she is at his presence around her. He asks Bonnie if she is worried. Perhaps she's afraid of heights or airplanes. As if not. She's not afraid of airplanes at all, and she's never had motion sickness. The reason Bonnie's nervous is because she's only going on a business trip with her boss. Bonnie thinks that if junior manager Nelson would go with them, she would definitely feel better. She's been so diligent about avoiding her principal, and now they're going on a trip for 4 days and 3 nights. Johnny Moore decided to reassure Bonnie and told her that an airplane is the safest mode of transportation. In fact, the probability of an accident is negligible, about 1 in a million. It's true that the fatality rate in such incidents is 100%. Is that him trying to reassure Bonnie? Johnny assures her that nothing will happen, not to worry, since he's lucky in life. As long as she's with him, she's in no danger. Bonnie wriggles her fingers, thinking about the fact that nothing bad will happen. A few hours later, they flew to Singapore. The company had pre-booked hotel rooms for them. Johnny Moore and Bonnie took the elevator to the 30th floor. Bonnie thought that the scheduled meetings went fine. The boss thanked her for doing a good job. Since they were tired, it was best to go take a break now. Bonnie wished the director a good rest and entered her room. It was a beautifully cleaned room, and the view from the window must be great, especially at night. Bonnie swung the window all the way open. "Wow," she said. "This is really quite beautiful. Incredible view from her window. Too bad she didn't have anyone to admire the view with. She thinks she needs to send the pictures to Kelly." Kelly loves the pictures. She knows a delicious restaurant in Singapore that serves great crab. Bonnie is hesitant to tell Kelly or not, but anyway, she's on a business trip with her boss. As it happens, it's just the two of them. Kelly said, "You mean the virgin guy?" "Yes. They will be here for 4 days and 3 nights. It's so awkward she wants to literally fall through the ground." Kelly recommends taking this chance to find out how her boss really feels about her. Kelly is sure he definitely has feelings for Bonnie. She doesn't think anyone is capable of saying, "I'm a virgin, and let's get married." Bonnie needs to figure out what kind of relationship she wants with this virgin. Kelly is hoping that they will realize feelings for each other and already confess. Will Bonnie even flash any feelings for Johnny Moore? Bonnie seems unlikely since he said he won't sleep with a girl until after the wedding. Bonnie asked Kelly how many men are able to maintain their chastity by being alone with a girl they like for 4 days and 3 nights. Kelly replied that maybe Bonnie could change his beliefs today. If things don't work out during this business trip, then he doesn't see her as a woman, or he has problems down there. Kelly says some words that make Bonnie start to worry. Now she's losing sleep. Oh, Bonnie jumped at the knock on the door. The time had already passed midnight. I wonder who came in there. Someone said, "It's me, open up." Oh, right, of course, it was Johnny Moore. Bonnie opened the door for him. She asked him what he was doing here at this hour. The point is, when he thought Bonnie was in the next room, he just couldn't sleep. Johnny Moore stated that he was on edge. Wow. He abruptly and unexpectedly picked Bonnie up in his arms and carried her to the bed. Looking into her eyes, Johnny pronounced that he wanted her right now. He kissed her passionately on the lips. Bonnie asked him to stop. After all, he had said that he would only do it with his wife. Johnny Moore replied that it didn't make sense anymore. Bonnie blushed and became embarrassed. Johnny gently began kissing her neck. Bonnie asked her boss to slow down. "Stop, something's not right here. Come on, was that a dream again?" Bonnie thinks this is unbearable. How much longer are these dreams going to go on? Will it only stop if she and Johnny Moore get married? Sometime later, Bonnie and her boss are riding in the car to a business meeting. He asked her if she had a good night's sleep. Bonnie replies that not really. In fact, she couldn't even sleep a wink after she woke up from that dream. Johnny said that he had trouble sleeping too. But why? Well, he doesn't know. Maybe because Johnny Moore was with Bonnie? What? Bonnie was shocked to hear that. He didn't understand what Bonnie was thinking that made her face turn red. She turned away and said she wasn't thinking anything like that, and her face wasn't red at all. Johnny didn't take his eyes off Bonnie for a long time. He confided to her that he would never tire of looking at her. Bonnie wondered, when had he ever looked at her? All the time. Ever since Joni had started watching her. Bonnie suggested having a few drinks instead of dinner. The appetizers at the bars are pretty good now, and it's even better than dinner. She didn't say that because she absolutely wanted to have a drink with him. Joni Moore figured it out. They ended up going down from their rooms to the bar, where there was just a vacant table by the window. They ordered appetizers and alcohol. Bonnie decided to drink in one gulp. Johnny Moore asked her to drink in moderation. He'd said he wouldn't be responsible for Bonnie when she passed out. He didn't mean to say that he would leave her just because she was drunk. Johnny Moore said he's not that uncouth. Bonnie knows that. She always thought he wasn't. Sure, he probably won't leave her here, but Bonnie doesn't know where he might take her, does she? At this point, she's really scared. Joni Moore thinks it will be troublesome if Bonnie can't tell the difference between dream and reality like last time. If that happens again, even he won't be able to tell how it will end. It would be better if Bonnie didn't trust him so easily. In her case, it was better not to trust Joni at all. Bonnie tensed slightly. Yes, he was joking. No need to worry. Joni Moore wouldn't kidnap her. Bonnie wondered, why did it have to be a joke? Wow, Bonnie's face is red and she thinks she's lost her mind. What did she even just think of? What a delightful night Singapore is. Joni Moore and Bonnie decided to take a walk around the city. Since it's one of the most popular tourist spots, there are so many couples here. I wonder if the people around them think they're a couple too. Or is it just Bonnie who thinks that? She looked around and then focused her gaze on Joni. She wondered what was in that man's mind. Here was their last night in this city-state. Bonnie was surprised that time seemed to go faster abroad. To be honest, when Bonnie found out they were going on a business trip together, she was a little worried. After all, this is her second business trip abroad, so she thought that she would be a burden and would not be able to help Joni Moore in any way. But she is glad that everything went well. Joni is sure he's a lucky man. He wasn't worried about their trip together, only slightly excited. Moreover, he was so excited that he couldn't even sleep the first night. Bonnie wondered. Since when was the principal so smiley? Even if he smiled, he always looked stern. Bonnie answered him that she was seeing him in a different light lately. Johnny Moore has become more outspoken, laughing more, and more sly than she thought. In any case, Bonnie thinks he has many sides to him that she didn't realize. He asked Bonnie if she really didn't like that about him. No, she can't say she doesn't like it, just this. Just this? Bonnie got out of the situation and said she thought it was cute. Joni Moore thought she'd just confessed. What? No, it wasn't a confession at all. That's not what Bonnie meant at all. She just told him again that he was more cunning than she realized. Johnny Moore doesn't act like that with everyone, just Bonnie. All of this is only possible because she is her. Joni looked into Bonnie's beautiful eyes. Swallowing saliva with excitement, Bonnie thought, why me? What on earth does the principal think of her? Since when had his feelings for her changed? After a while, they returned to the hotel. They got into the elevator to go up to the 30th floor. Bonnie's fingers are fidgeting with excitement. They are soaking wet from the rain. Bonnie thinks her boss is very attractive when he's wet. Bonnie, stop thinking about it. They got to the 30th floor and the elevator doors opened. Joni Moore and Bonnie got out and walked to their rooms. Before they separated, they looked each other in the eye. Johnny Moore had something to say to Bonnie. He complimented her on what a great job she had done. She had an early departure tomorrow morning, so he asked her not to stay out too late. Yeah, of course she understood. But Bonnie also complimented her boss for doing a good job too. Joni Moore replied, okay, bye, and slammed the door behind him. Bonnie was very surprised. That's it? This is how it's going to end like this? Not understanding the reaction from her boss, Bonnie ended up going into her room. After taking a shower, she is still thinking about it. Bonnie's really shocked. He just replied, okay, bye. Bonnie even thought about the fact that maybe she wasn't attractive. She remembered what Kelly wrote to her about how if Bonnie doesn't sleep with her boss during this business trip, then he doesn't see her as a woman, or he has health issues. It seems to Bonnie as if he's not interested in her. Or has he changed his mind? It all boils down to Johnny Moore doesn't see Bonnie as a woman. Wait a minute, or he's got a real health problem. Bonnie opened the refrigerator and took out a can of alcoholic beverage. She opened the can and drank it in a gulp. Bonnie thinks that she shouldn't be discouraged. But why was she so sad? In his hotel room, Johnny Moore was busy working. He was reading various documents. Since his schedule is completely irregular, and he is busy working even after hours. Johnny heard something? He's sure he heard a sound. Someone knocking on the door very insistently. The hotel staff certainly wouldn't knock this late and unannounced. so it could only be one person. Johnny Moore wonders what Bonnie is doing here at this hour. And Bonnie can barely stand on her own 2 feet. Apparently she's had too much to drink. She's mumbling that she can't sleep. Maybe she's sleepwalking. We should wake her up before someone sees her. Johnny Moore holds her up so she doesn't fall in the hallway. Oh, who do we have here? Smiling, Bonnie noticed her very attractive boss standing in front of her. Johnny asks if she drank again after they broke up. Bonnie says no, even though she could barely stand on her own 2 feet. The man can't believe the answer, since she reeks so strongly of alcohol. Oh, come on! Bonnie excused herself, saying that she had only had a little alcohol that was in that little booger-like minibar. Johnny incredulously replied that it didn't seem like a little. After all, there were 10 more cans than usual. Had she really drunk it all? Justifying herself, Bonnie pointed out that it was a little, and she wouldn't get intoxicated from that much. The principal remarked that she seemed quite drunk, and it would be better if she just went back to her room. Bonnie said there was no way she could sleep. No matter how much she tried, and no matter how much alcohol she put into herself, Johnny Moore looked at her with incomprehension. Looking at Bonnie ironically, the man remarked that she was the one who couldn't sleep. So what did he have to do with it? Or did she want Johnny to sing her a lullaby? Bonnie wondered why he was so nonchalant. He was the reason she hadn't slept well for the last 4 days and 3 nights. Lowering her head resentfully, Bonnie said, "It's so unfair, it makes me want to die. Why is the boss so calm? How can you be fine? You're not affected in any way." Johnny didn't know what she meant. After that meeting at the hot springs, the boss kept appearing in her dreams. Bonnie asked, did he really think that was the end of it? Every time she saw the boss, she started imagining things. Johnny tried desperately to explain how sad she was that he hadn't gotten wetter then in the rain. Her eyes skimmed her boss's clothes hundreds of times for a day. It didn't matter if they were outside or in the office, regardless of the location. Bonnie described her feelings in the most vivid colors. She sees the boss as if he were a naked king. In despair, the girl clutched her head with her hands. Her thoughts of Johnny lately had not given her any peace at all. Bonnie rebuked the man that he had also seen her naked, but for some reason it was only her who had been blown away. She added indignantly that she had never liked Johnny one bit, and was only a supervisor, always coming in with a scowl and an unhappy expression on his face. That was how she saw the boss. The girl was perplexed by such injustice of Johnny, and desperately reproached him that because of his sexuality began to turn into some kind of pervert, and since it was his fault, let him take responsibility for it. Huh? Johnny suddenly grabbed Bonnie's arm sharply. The girl's cheeks flushed with surprise. She looked at him with a look of surprise and interest at the same time. What was next for her? The boss led Bonnie into the room. The door slammed shut behind them and the hotel corridor became quiet and empty. Slamming the door shut, Johnny pressed the girl against them, completely covering her feminine silhouette with his strong body. "What do I have to do for you?" he whispered, leaning down to her ear so that his lips touched lightly on her hair, immediately adding, "What do I have to do to make things okay for you?" Bonnie knew exactly what she wanted right now, and those words were just driving her crazy. With an easy, smooth motion, she gently nuzzled his neck. "This is it," the girl whispered confidently, bringing her flaming face closer to Johnny for a kiss. Closing her eyes, Bonnie touched her lips sensuously to his. Johnny's hands touched her hair, pulling gently to make this kiss last longer. For a second, their lips parted. Johnny asked, was that enough for her? He confidently looked directly into her shining eyes. Of course, it wasn't enough for Bonnie. All this time, she'd been going crazy imagining and wanting exactly him, and now was just the perfect opportunity to fulfill everything she had secretly dreamed of. Johnny leaned in to kiss the girl again, and she, thinking that this chance might never come again, surrendered herself to his soft lips. Bonnie's hands slipped from the man's neck in a smooth, barely perceptible movement, slowly moving lower. The silhouette of his gorgeous body appeared in her mind again, the same one she had dreamed about a dozen times, the one she had thought about more than 100 times. It seemed like seconds separated Bonnie from what she wanted. Excitement made Bonnie's heart beat faster, but desire was stronger than prejudice. At last, her hands came down low enough that the girl could reach the waistband of Johnny's robe. She was determined to untie it right now, thinking that no man on earth could stop now. Johnny pulled Bonnie's hand away, preventing her from doing what she intended. He stopped her by telling her it wouldn't work. and he wouldn't do it until he married someone. The girl asked in desperation, "Is he really saying that after they've gotten this far? Does it even happen that way?" But, Johnny reminded her, he still hadn't heard back from Miss Bonnie. Bonnie, who had just been blazing with desire, was instantly cooled by those words. Again, this fellow had brought up talk of marriage. Was he haunted by a ghost who had died without ever marrying? Pulling back her hands, the girl asked just to be honest if Joni didn't want to do it with her, and stopped these excuses about won't do it before marriage. The boss soothingly touched her hand lightly, clarifying that it wasn't that he didn't like Miss Bonnie at all. Why the hell is he like that then? Maybe he's just toying with her right now. Bonnie frustratedly chided the man that if he wasn't going to do that, he shouldn't have even started. Joni was upset that the girl was depressed, and he gently put his arms around Bonnie, pulling her close, comforting her against his chest. Johnny asked her if he looked like a man who didn't care about anything, clarifying that if Bonnie thought about his body a dozen times a day, he thought about her 100, if not 1,000 times more. Johnny tried to calm the distraught girl down, explaining that he couldn't possibly list all the things he'd done to her in his dreams, because he had done everything he could to her, to the point where he couldn't look at Bonnie in peace now. Joni wished the girl was completely his, and was holding on with all his might to keep his composure. Could he play with her when he liked her so much? For even at this very moment he was going crazy with the desire to pick her up and carry her to bed. Joni wondered if she wanted him just the same. Bonnie's eyes seemed to answer him, and without words to that question. The boss looked intently into her eyes, asking her to answer just one question. Would Bonnie marry him? Well, how can human eyes be so beautiful and seductive? Bonnie pondered. Why on earth would such a handsome man marry her? He has a great character, excellent abilities, and even a great body. He is the perfect model of a husband. On the other hand, he probably has a whole line of women to choose from. What if this man really is her destiny? Maybe he is her destiny, Bonnie thought to herself as she gazed at his sculpted torso. But not the kind of destiny that lasts only a short night, but the kind of destiny you can spend eternity with. From these thoughts, and the excitement that engulfed the girl, Bonnie's hands nervously rubbed the edges of her robe. Missing this opportunity would make her a complete fool. All right, let's visualize it. This marriage to the boss. The girl thought for a moment. Love alone wasn't enough for marriage. Their families would have to meet. Joni looked questioningly at Bonnie, trying to guess her thoughts. The girl continued her inner dialogue. Looking from his parents' side, would they have agreed to have their son marry someone like Bonnie? The experience of previous relationships drowned out the arguments of the heart. Digging into the past and weighing the pros and cons in her mind, Bonnie was tormented by one question. Could she marry? Her musings were interrupted by Joni's voice demanding an answer. The girl was sorry. No matter what she thought about it, it wouldn't work out. Bonnie had declared that she wasn't fit to be married. Even if her boss Joni was. Dallas, Texas, on one floor of a high-rise office building, someone called out to Bonnie, who had returned from a business trip. It was Nelson who raised his hand to cheerfully greet his coworker. After wishing her a good morning, Nelson asked Bonnie how her trip had gone. Bonnie replied that it had gone well. Nelson seemed overjoyed by his coworker's arrival. He was just glowing with happiness. The guy reported that he had heard that she and the boss were the only ones who had gone. Bonnie was very surprised to hear such awareness from Nelson, but he simply replied that he had learned it by accident from the manager. Nelson sympathetically commented that the girl must have had a hard time for 4 days since their boss is pretty cold. Not easy. Not easy for her because of her busy schedule, but not because of her boss in any way. Bonnie countered that, on the contrary, he had been attentive to her throughout the trip, which touched her. Nelson didn't really believe her words. Looking at her suspiciously, he asked if something had happened behind their boss. What could have happened? It didn't sound very believable coming from Bonnie. After all, she knew she wasn't telling the truth. In her memories, Bonnie was transported back to the very moment she had turned Joni down. Then he wanted to know what the reason for her rejection was. Bonnie replied that he wouldn't understand her anyway, just as she couldn't understand him. Then she promised that she wouldn't bother him again, neither drunk nor sane. She found these words very hard to say at the time. Joni didn't understand the real reason for her refusal, nor why she asked him not to get so close to her. Bonnie was desperate and felt very strongly that she had to say, against her true wishes, something that could separate this desirable man from her forever. Johnny thought over her words. Anyone in her position would have dreamed of saying yes to him. What was the real reason for her decision? Thinking back on that night's conversation with Johnny, Bonnie blamed herself for forcibly trying to take on something she couldn't handle. Oh yes, and it was all because she'd been completely preoccupied with his looks. She and the boss were the wrong people for each other. She was afraid to try her luck again, and she didn't want to get her hopes up on anyone else right now. Nelson waved his hand in front of Bonnie's eyes, pulling her out of the painful hold of her memories. He asked what she was thinking so hard about. Did something really happen between her and her boss? Bonnie still denied it. Yeah, of course it didn't. Nelson gave her an incredulous look. He tried to bring Bonnie into the open by asking if he could ask his boss the same question, especially since he was just about to get here. Curious Nelson. Where had he gotten Bonnie's head? She was obviously nervous. Nelson understood perfectly well. He smiled at the girl's confusion. Aha, look at that. Something's happened. He said affirmatively, continuing to piss off the already tense and frightened Bonnie. At that moment, her eyes seemed to emit a foul language. Bonnie moved forward, speeding up her stride, leaving her overly curious colleague behind. Nelson realized he'd overdone it, and decided to smooth things over by talking about a sakura blossom he'd noticed on his way to work. Rambling along behind Bonnie, he talked enthusiastically about cherry blossoms and why he liked them among all the flowers. The boy remarked that the cherries must be in full bloom by this weekend. Bonnie answered him briefly, not even taking in the meaning of his words. Finally, Nelson overtook Bonnie standing right in front of her. Bonnie looked questioningly at her coworker. I wonder what he wants already. Smiling, Nelson offered the girl to watch the cherry blossoms with him this weekend, if she had time. It was already dark outside. It was starting to rain. Bonnie glanced at the clock on her arm, noting to herself that work hours were finally over. Wow, it was already 8 o'clock. She hadn't been able to focus on anything since she got back from her business trip. Bonnie walked outside and was surprised that it was raining again. Oh, she hadn't brought an umbrella. She stood pensively for a while, putting her hand in the rain. This rain might cause the cherry blossoms to fall quickly. Looking at the cherry blossoms, their petals crumbling under the weight of the cold drops, she felt sad. The wet drops on Bonnie's hand brought back memories of that rainy day, like today. The last time it had rained, Boss had held an umbrella over her, and last night was the first time she didn't dream about him. And Bonnie doesn't see him naked anymore. It's a strange feeling. Had she finally gotten rid of it? Oh, what a relief. Sometimes thoughts are more tiring than any work. Bonnie waded slowly through the puddles. She was just about to walk away from the office building when suddenly she saw the silhouette of a man in the distance. He was holding an umbrella. It was like déjà vu. Bonnie just couldn't believe her eyes. She literally froze with surprise. Good night, my favorite. Wow, was that really her boss? What was he doing here at this late hour? It's exciting when the person you like shows up out of the blue. Bonnie started to ask him if he'd forgotten anything at the office, but the boss cut off the reminder of the girl's question and said that he had come to meet her. After that day, he couldn't stop thinking about Bonnie. He even said that he couldn't concentrate at work today because of that, adding that he couldn't sleep because he'd been thinking a lot and realized he'd been wrong. He had been in such a hurry to change Miss Bonnie's feelings that he had forgotten to say the most important thing. Johnny had forgotten to say that he loved her. The girl looked at him in anticipation with her deep, penetrating gaze. The boss admitted to Bonnie that she is the one he likes, but he has no experience in dating. Oh well, is that even possible for a man like Joni? The man began to apologize for hurting Bonnie's feelings, even if he did it unintentionally. There was no way he could give her up, the voice of his heart clouding his mind. Johnny finally realized that the girl had a negative opinion of marriage. Therefore, he assumed that Bonnie had a negative experience or a difficult situation that she couldn't tell others about. The boss expressed concern that his words might have made Bonnie feel burdened. Lowering his gaze, the strong man now seemed so sensual. Never before had the girl seen him like this. Apologizing, he stepped closer to Bonnie. Looking intently into her eyes with his penetrating eyes, Johnny admitted that he was sorry, but he had no desire to leave her life. He knew, after all, that the girl was interested in him, even if only a little. Bonnie listened to this, afraid to believe what she was hearing, and couldn't utter a word. The boss corrected himself, clarifying that it would be more correct to say that the girl was not interested in him, but in his body. Bonnie cringed at that clarification. Oh yes, of course he was right. If Johnny decided to back off now, they would drift apart again. He reminded himself that he was new to the relationship, so his only option was to keep moving forward. With a confident look and straight in his eyes, he told Bonnie that she could do whatever she wanted, and if she wanted to so badly, let her avoid him. Wow, Bonnie couldn't take her eyes off him. Even with words, this man made her heart pound faster. It didn't matter how long it took. Johnny would try to endure it all. Some time had passed since that meeting outside the business center. Bonnie's mind kept flashing back to the picture of her boss confessing his love for her. He was saying that Bonnie was the one he liked. The girl wanted to keep replaying those words in her head. Bonnie hadn't given up hope that if he kept it up, one day he would get tired and raise the white flag. After calming herself with these thoughts, Bonnie, who was at her desk at the time, decided to start creating her morning report. At that very moment, the boss walks into the office with a young and beautiful girl. After introducing her as Rachel Parker, the boss informed her that this girl would be working with them starting today. He asked Rachel to introduce herself to the team members. After introducing herself again, the girl explained to everyone that she had been transferred from the Chinese branch to work in the planning team of the head office. Those present couldn't take their eyes off their newfound colleague. Wow, she was so beautiful. Bonnie couldn't help but notice it too. Rachel, standing next to her boss, made a promise in front of everyone that she would work hard to help the company and her team members. The two of them looked like a work of art. There were whispers in the office that they would look good together. That's true. Of course, Bonnie was stressed about it, but she couldn't disagree. In a few minutes, the clock strikes 12. It's lunchtime. The coworkers ask Bonnie if she's going to go to lunch. The girl agrees, replying that they can go and she will catch up with them soon. Almost everyone had already left for lunch, while Bonnie continued to sit at her desk. And she had her reasons. Rachel's new coworker's seat was right next to Bonnie's. It was her first day on the job, she wondered. Would she be eating lunch alone? With those thoughts in mind, Bonnie suggested that Rachel have lunch together in the cafeteria. The girl replied that she had no appetite and didn't want to have lunch. As she continued typing, Rachel assured Bonnie that everything was fine and to ignore her. Well, as long as she said so. Bonnie decided not to insist and went to catch up with her coworkers who had left for lunch. But for some reason, she had a feeling she'd seen this girl somewhere before. Or maybe she just looked like a celebrity, and that's why she seemed so familiar to Bonnie. Meanwhile, Rachel was biting her lip nervously, mentally wishing she could be left alone as soon as possible. It seems this girl is not as simple as she seems at first glance. The occasion welcomed Miss Rachel to the local cafe for a corporate dinner this evening. Gathered in a buzzing company, colleagues amicably clinked glasses, making toasts in honor of the new colleague. What corporate dinner would be complete without Matthew Finch? He was as usual in his repertoire, indignant about why not everyone was drinking. Matthew insisted that the welcome shot was mandatory for everyone to drink. Bonnie was also here, but her mood was dampened by the fact that this time the manager decided to sit next to her. It pissed her off. All eyes were on the new female employee. Someone asked if Miss Rachel had a young man. It was obvious that the girl was flattered by this amount of attention. Embarrassed, Rachel replied that she was still single. The men were especially surprised by this, not believing that such a beautiful girl could be single. But it was true, she hadn't had a boyfriend in a long time. The man's co-workers continued to shower attention on the new girl on the team, asking her what type of man would be perfect for her. Rachel explained that she liked mature men who were ready for family life. Some have already gotten excited, asking, "Oh, so I'm right for you? Women who are looking for family men usually marry quickly. Are you like that, Miss Rachel?" Taking a sip of beer, Rachel added that she wants to start a happy family with someone she loves. She wants a man with serious intentions who is ready to start a family. The man who asked Rachel about her preferences couldn't believe that there was such a type of woman like her left in the modern world. He kept asking the girl what type of men's looks she liked. Rachel embarrassingly replied that looks were not important to her. But what type of man was closest to this girl's heart? Rachel thought for a moment. Perhaps she knew who would be perfect for her. Rachel glanced thoughtfully at the men sitting at a neighboring table. After a little thought, she said that her ideal type of man was someone like their boss. Bonnie, who had been listening relaxedly to everything up to that point, visibly tensed up. What? She said she wanted someone like Joni? Bonnie was perplexed. Why was it suddenly the boss? Haha, that's pretty witty of Rachel. Mentally, Bonnie tried not to take her words seriously. But after all, Rachel had said that she liked the type of man Joni was. Even though the boss looks indifferent on the outside, who knows how he might feel about her? He's a man too, after all. And after Rachel's words about wanting to be a good wife and mother, it was obvious that this was the type that the boss might like, especially since he wasn't married. Finishing her glass of beer, Bonnie tried desperately to chase the intrusive thoughts out of her head. She realized that a man who was eager to marry and a woman who would be a good wife and mother would make a model couple, moreover, a family. Such unions are made no other way than in heaven. Pictures of the perfect couple flashed through Bonnie's mind, keeping her on her toes. Meanwhile, Matthew was glad that he had found such a wonderful drinking companion in the person of Bonnie, sitting at that table, and he offered the girl another drink. Bonnie, beginning to stutter, rejected the manager's dubious proposal, saying that if she drank even a little more, she would definitely be drunk. Matthew snidely remarked that she drank alcohol just to get drunk. The drunken manager insisted that Bonnie drink, urging her on with his insistent exclamations. At that moment, the boss approached their table. "How would you like to have a drink with me?" he asked, looking disdainfully at a drunk and disheveled Matthew. Startled by his boss's sudden appearance, Matthew immediately began to make excuses. He voiced his conclusion that there was no need to force someone to drink if they didn't want to. Not everyone wants to be like Matthew's manager, after all. Taking a seat at the table next to Matthew, the boss informed him that he would drink the rest of his drinks with him. The manager looked very confused. Matthew avoided the boss at every company dinner because he was uncomfortable with him. And now he seemed to be in an impasse. The director's sudden appearance had disrupted all his plans, making him even thirsty. Noticing Bonnie's alcohol-red face, the boss assumed that she was quite drunk, so he suggested she go outside and get some fresh air. Oh yes, Bonnie could use some fresh air. Meanwhile, it was late evening outside. The streetlights were already on everywhere. Bonnie went outside and sat down on a bench near the cafe. Phew, she didn't feel so good after drinking. The fresh air had a good effect on Bonnie. Sobering up a bit, her thoughts began to clear. Touching the bench, she plunged into the memories associated with the place. Bonnie remembered Joni coming up to her, also sitting on the bench, sometime after one of the corporate parties. God, she'd asked her boss to sleep with her then, hadn't she? He had been outwardly calm then, but inside he must have been very surprised. The girl laughed at this memory of hers. Someone's question about what had made her laugh so hard cut Bonnie's fun abruptly short. A mute question froze in Bonnie's eyes. What déjà vu? In front of her, just like that night from her memories, stood her boss. The principal walked over to Bonnie. For a few seconds, they just stared into each other's eyes. The man took a seat on the bench next to Bonnie. The girl became uncomfortable and moved away from her boss almost to the very edge of the bench. Johnny diffused the somewhat tense situation with a joke about not being contagious. Bonnie smiled and asked what he would do if someone suddenly saw them. They might take it the wrong way after all. The boss, staring intently into her eyes, countered that they wouldn't take it the wrong way. It's not like they were kissing or hugging. From that day on, at all corporate parties, the boss told Bonnie to sit next to him. Ha! He thinks it's so easy. Every seat next to the boss is always taken. Good manners, a handsome face that was nice to look at. The table he sat at was always popular. Echoing in Bonnie's mind were Rachel's words from today. I like someone who looks like the boss. Why on earth had she remembered those words? Bonnie felt like talking about it. She shared with her boss that she was surprised to see Rachel for the first time. She thought she looked like a celebrity to her. The girl then cautiously inquired if Rachel was beautiful by her boss's standards. Johnny didn't deny it. Rachel was indeed pretty. Then your heart must flutter at the sight of such a beautiful person? Bonnie asked the question that had been troubling her so much. The boss answered her yes again. There was no stopping Bonnie now. She had to ask the main question that was troubling her. The girl clarified if Johnny liked the likes of Miss Rachel because from what he said, she was a beauty. The boss looked at Bonnie in surprise. She had misunderstood his words. The man decided to get his point across, explaining that one person may look unattractive to someone, while another will think that there is no one in the world more beautiful than that person. You know who that is without me explaining it, right? The boss added, looking directly into the eyes of a flustered Bonnie. And this man said he was a total zero in relationships. What a liar. Office building. Another day at work. In the tea room, the employees were discussing something vividly. From the open door, you could clearly hear them discussing Rachel's new colleague. In that room, the girls were sitting at a table. Kim and Gemma were outraged at the way the staff were staring stupidly at Miss Rachel and following her around like she was some kind of queen. And they'd never been treated like that. A blatant injustice. Bonnie sat nearby, listening to Kim, who said that Rachel reminded her of a sly fox. She couldn't understand what they liked about her, that they were so servile to her. Another girl from the 4 co-workers at the table asked what Bonnie thought about it. Everyone was curious to know if she, too, thought Rachel looked like a fox. Bonnie was taken aback by the question in her direction. She didn't like this kind of discussion. She didn't know what to say. Phew. Bonnie didn't have time to answer the awkward question, because into the room with the words, "Ah, there you are. I've been looking for you." Rachel walked in. The girls who had been so eloquent a moment ago were now sitting silently with their mouths shut. I wondered if Rachel had heard their conversation. Going in, Rachel placed a pretty box on the table. She had made cookies and nuts to treat the girls, carefully adding less sugar in case any of them were on a diet. There was a separate box for each of them. The girls wondered if she had made so many herself. Rachel described herself as a rather shy and timid person, and in order to get closer to the group, she decided to do something nice, especially for them. The girl thought that she should be the one to take the first step towards getting closer. Thus, she gathered her courage and came. Wow, what a beauty. Perhaps Rachel's first was wrong? Such a step from the newly minted colleague certainly no one expected. The girls became ashamed of their words, which minutes earlier they had said about her. Colleagues decided to praise Rachel, said that she had golden hands, and that she would be a wonderful wife. Someone even said that no matter who her man would be, he would definitely be incredibly happy with her. At those words, the boss walked into the tea room. Ah, it seemed so symbolic to Rachel. Could it have been a sign from above? He went in for something insignificant and was about to leave when suddenly Rachel called out to him. She also offered him a taste of the cookies she had baked herself. Without even turning around, the boss replied that he wasn't a fan of those. Rachel continued to stand with the box of cookies in her hands. Maybe he didn't want to take it because he didn't like sweets. The girl began to persuade the boss, explaining that she had made sugar-free and butter-free cookies with tiger nuts especially for him. Rachel persuaded him to try at least one of them, because she had been trying and preparing them all morning. The boss stared at her silently, listening to her entreaties, but finally he took the box and thanked her and said he would try them. Wow, she did it. Rachel was very pleased with herself. Bonnie continued to sit at the table, listening to her friends marvel at Rachel's persuasive skills. Wow, even the boss couldn't say no to her. She's so beautiful, and she's got a real mouth on her. Who could turn her down? They look great together. Bonnie's feeling down again. I wonder if they'll start dating. God, Bonnie was once again troubled by these thoughts. Why has she been feeling so strange lately? And somewhere in the offices of the business center, someone was once again raving about Rachel. Men were volunteering to help in any way they could. Rachel's name seemed to be everywhere lately. The new employee had managed to win everyone's affection. Bonnie noted to herself that the atmosphere in the office was much brighter with the arrival of Miss Rachel. Well, she's a bright person and works hard. She is now liked even by those who had doubts at first. However, Bonnie still had a strange feeling about her. Damn, why is she looking at her like that? That look in Rachel's eyes looked straight into her soul. Bonnie felt a strange discomfort. Not knowing what emotion to give off, she just grinned stupidly. The boss walked into the office. Rachel called out to him, instantly shifting her attention from Bonnie to the boss. Where did this upstart come from? Rachel shows her boss some kind of document, clarifying that he had given it to her when they met. Bonnie strains all her hearing and all her attention to hear just a little bit of what these two are talking about. A few days later, Sakura was beginning to unfurl her delicate pink blossoms. Bonnie returns from lunch with a pleasant feeling of satiety. Ah, what beauty is all around. The girl decides to linger for a while near the sakura trees to admire their blossoms. Wow, I have to take a picture of that. Ha, what's this? Turning on her phone's camera, suddenly Bonnie sees two people on the screen. Oh my God, it's the boss and Rachel. That's odd. since this is the back of the office, and there's usually no one here. Bonnie rounds the corner of the building so she won't be seen. I wonder what they're talking about. They must have some secrets in common now that they were here. Absorbed in her observation, Bonnie didn't notice someone coming up behind her. It was Nelson. He stood behind her for a minute and asked her what she was doing here. Bonnie's heart nearly stopped with surprise. Nelson was curious as to what Bonnie might have seen, so he tried to look around the corner of the building. The girl prevented him from doing so, quickly reminding him that lunchtime was almost over and they should hurry up. Nelson tried to argue that there was still a little time, but Bonnie talked him into coming back early. She didn't want her and Nelson to get caught. No one must find out that she had accidentally seen the boss and Miss Rachel alone together. Oh, if only to find out what they'd been talking about. Why were the two of them there together? Bonnie wondered what secrets might have bound these two together. Nelson paced nearby, sipping his drink, and didn't realize what was around the corner that had Bonnie so puzzled. He finally decided to interrupt the girl's thoughts with a question about what time he and she would meet tomorrow. What was tomorrow? Bonnie had completely forgotten their arrangement. Nelson resented the girl's cruelty in forgetting about it. They had agreed to watch the cherry blossoms this weekend. The girl apologized, asking if there would be anyone else besides them. Nelson squinted at her and said that it would be just him and Bonnie. The girl was very surprised by that answer. Wasn't it strange that it would be just the two of them? Bonnie was worried that if her co-workers saw the two of them together over the weekend, they might misunderstand it. After all, she and Nelson aren't even dating. So, as not to cause any unnecessary rumors, why don't we start dating? The guy suggested, waiting, looking Bonnie straight in the eye. An awkward pause hung between the co-workers. Cherry blossoms were blooming all around them, beautiful mute witnesses of romantic spring confessions. Nelson suddenly laughed, saying he was just kidding. Was he really joking? Bonnie was very tense about the joke. The pause that hung after his sentence made her almost believe he was sincere. And why make a joke like that? Nelson smilingly justified that he just wanted to see the reaction. The guy decided to diffuse the situation a little and suggested that Bonnie invite their co-workers as well, if she didn't want to go alone. Then she'd definitely say yes. Well, a promise is a promise. The afternoon was almost over, but Miss Rachel had not yet returned. The thought of it was keeping Bonnie from concentrating on her work. Was she really going to tell him she loved him? But surely the boss would say no, right? He had only recently confessed his feelings for Bonnie. Rachel's words at the corporate event about having a family with a man she would love and needing a man who was serious about starting a family kept coming out of her head. No, Bonnie couldn't be sure that her boss would turn Rachel down. Even if she did like him, Bonnie has no right to think that. After all, she and Joni aren't in a relationship. Her musings were interrupted by the clacking of heels. Rachel walked in. Holding a drink in her hand, she walked to her workplace, literally glowing with happiness. This surprised Bonnie, while also striking a nerve. She asked if something good had happened to Miss Rachel that the girl was so radiant. Rachel answered yes, looking at Bonnie enigmatically. Interest mixed with anxiety made Bonnie clarify what had happened. "Oh, it's private. I can't tell you. BTW. With those words, Rachel held out her drink to Bonnie. Rachel offered her the coffee her boss had bought her, but she doesn't like coffee, so she decided to treat Bonnie to it. God, it's her favorite coffee, an iced mocha with whipped cream. Oh, why does everything feel so tight inside? It was evening, and the city was already darkening. The high-rise buildings glittered with the light of their on-off windows. The time had already passed 8 o'clock. Bonnie stretched tiredly, straightening her back that was tired from the day. Déjà vu? The girl was working a lot of overtime these days. You haven't left yet? The boss, who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, startled the girl half to death with that question. The principal asked Bonnie why she continued to work overtime, despite what she was told. He gave her a stern look, threatening the girl not to make him look like a bad boss. Joni leaned over her, perplexed as to why she was working so hard when she had a few days to do the job. Oh, maybe she was planning to go on vacation. Bonnie looked embarrassed, explaining that she just wanted to get the work done ahead of time. The boss closed the work program tabs on Bonnie's computer. He asked the girl to know the measure or she wouldn't get more money if she did more work. Pfft, is a boss allowed to say that? I mean, he's her boss. But the principal said he wasn't kidding. From that day on, Bonnie was forbidden to work overtime. The girl looked at the smiling boss, mentally noting that he smiled the same way at Rachel. The man noticed Bonnie's stare and asked if she wanted to say something to him. No, Bonnie didn't. Oh, it was getting so late. The boss asked that she wrap up and he would drive her home, and so they're in Johnny's car. Thinking about how much time had passed since the trip to Singapore, Bonnie's gaze fell on the keychain hanging on the rearview mirror. Ha ha, a dog's head, really? Bonnie assessed the keychain with a detective-like gaze. What's that hanging from the mirror? That kind of thing wasn't the boss's style. The girl couldn't believe he could buy such a thing himself. It looks handmade. Maybe a gift from someone else? The boss has been working overtime lately. I don't think it would have been given by an office staff member. Maybe it was a gift from Rachel. If it is, then why wouldn't he tell her about it? But the boss's confession doesn't obligate him to tell her everything, does it? Bonnie worried whether she had the right to tell him anything at all, if suddenly his feelings had changed. The girl was tormented by the misunderstanding of what kind of relationship she and her boss had. Did he still love her? Johnny asked Bonnie what she was doing this weekend. He suggested that she go somewhere with him, unless of course the girl had plans. Bonnie turned away to the window and F replied that she had plans. The boss asked if that was true. Bonnie replied that she did have plans. The man nervously tapped his fingers on the steering wheel of the car. They stopped at a red traffic signal. Bonnie felt my bag's cell phone vibrate. It was Nelson. But why was he calling so suddenly? Bonnie answered the phone. Nelson spoke so loudly that the boss heard every word. The girl tried to figure out the reason for his call, mentally angry that he had called at such a bad time. Nelson had only called to remind the forgetful Bonnie about tomorrow's meeting. The boss listened, thoughtful. Bonnie didn't answer him that she hadn't forgotten, so they ended the conversation, agreeing to see each other tomorrow. At last, Nelson added that he hoped to see the girl irresistible tomorrow. The boss was holding his chin, and he seemed either chagrined or upset. The car stopped again at the red light. A moment of silence reigned in the cabin. The silence was broken by the boss, wondering if Bonnie was really going to spend with Nelson. The girl tensed at the question. If only the boss didn't think something he didn't. Bowing his head thoughtfully, the man asked with a note of chagrin in his voice, "Do you like him?" Hearing no answer, the boss repeated his question. Wow, he had suggested what Bonnie had been dreading. After a short pause, the girl replied that she didn't like Nelson at all. Once again, standing at a red traffic light, the boss was outraged as to why she was then going to spend her weekend with someone she didn't like. The man began to admonish Bonnie that she shouldn't give false hope to Nelson if she didn't have any feelings for him. He reproachfully reminded Bonnie of how she had felt when she had been misunderstood. Bonnie thought in bewilderment that the headmaster was the only one who could do whatever he wanted while leaving others bewildered. She said in an indignant tone that she didn't understand why she had to hear it from her boss. She reproachfully reminded him that she wasn't even in a relationship with him, and he shouldn't be concerned about her personal life. God, was she really able to say that to him? In her mind, she justified her words by saying that he hadn't told her anything about Rachel either. In her mind, the picture of the two of them chatting sweetly around the corner. And the coffee he had bought her. Bonnie's favorite coffee he'd bought for Rachel. All this thinking prompted the girl to exclaim in a harsh tone that her boss had no right to tell her what she could and could not do. Bonnie asked her boss to get a grip. Yeah, Joni was confused. He certainly hadn't expected Bonnie's reaction to his words. God, why did he give in to his feelings again, letting his emotions run wild? Clutching the steering wheel tighter, the boss replied that he understood and apologized if he had spoiled Bonnie's mood. Silence reigned in the car. The traffic light turned green. They started up again. What a fool he is, Bonnie thought as she turned away from her window. What was she supposed to do when he agreed with her so quickly? And she had hoped so much that this would happen. What do you want to get from this man? What does Bonnie want? Bonnie received a text from Kelly again for the first time in a long time. The morning of the next day, lots of people strolling through an alley of blooming sakura trees, marveling at their beauty. Bonnie and Nelson were also here. Bonnie got a call from one of her coworkers saying she had a cold and couldn't make it. Too bad about that. Nelson, on the other hand, wasn't sorry at all. He said he wanted to walk here alone with Bonnie. Bonnie ironically remarked that she wasn't going to fall for that line. She was long past that age and not easily seduced. Nelson was pleased with her answer, saying that it was a good thing and he liked honest people. Bonnie countered that even so, she wasn't the kind of person who was willing to reveal all her skeletons in the closet. Saying that, she reimagined her naked boss. Nelson agreed with understanding. After all, every man must have his secrets. Bonnie fixed her hair thoughtfully. Even in this setting, she managed to remember him. Nelson was saying something about the cherry blossom season and the fact that there were a lot of couples here. Bonnie couldn't hear anyone, immersed in her own thoughts. I wonder what it would be like for her to walk here with her boss. Look at her. Instead of enjoying the beauty, she can't stop thinking about him. Nelson asked if Bonnie knew what sakura flowers meant in the language of flowers. Haha, and what's that? Bonnie inquired, as if finally waking up from her reverie. Nelson, happy as a child, exclaimed, "A midterm, really? Was that his idea of a joke right now?" There was a look of bewilderment on Bonnie's face. Nelson was told it by a cousin. Isn't that funny? Bonnie wasn't really amused somehow. The boy wondered what he could do to make Bonnie laugh. The girl continued to stare at him perplexed. Nelson noted aloud that Bonnie hadn't laughed once today and had even ignored him a few times. Oh, how embarrassing. She wasn't doing it on purpose, but because of her depressed state. Bonnie apologized to Nelson, promising not to think about extraneous things again. Nelson asked who Bonnie was thinking about so much. "Who is troubling your thoughts?" he asked, paraphrasing his first question, which had not been answered. Nelson was very troubled by the question. Who was he? The person occupying Bonnie's thoughts. Evening had come. Getting out of the car, Bonnie thanked Nelson for the ride and apologized for today. The guy countered that he'd enjoyed everything about today and asked Bonnie to be careful on the way home. Before he drove off, he winked at the girl, suggesting that she walk with him again, and jokingly said that in return, she would only have to look at him. Maybe he wasn't joking at all. Bonnie walked up the stairs. Her mind wasn't on today. What if? All day long the girl had been thinking about him. And now she was walking, enveloped in the warm spring wind and her worries about her boss. Bonnie sat down on one of the steps. Wait a minute. What was she going to do? The girl stared at the screen of her phone, clearly plotting something. She was racked with remorse after breaking up with her boss the night before. It's about time I gave up, she thought, flipping through the call list in the phone book. No, not again. Bonnie's finger accidentally touched the boss's phone number. The call went through. Reset, reset. Bonnie frantically tried to deflect the dialed number. Her excitement was making it hard to do so. It was too late. The boss picked up the phone saying, Speaking. God, what should he say? Confused, Bonnie found nothing better than to simply say, Hello, boss. It's me. He replied that he knew. Bonnie wondered what he was doing now. The boss was driving. The girl confusedly apologized, saying that in that case she wouldn't distract him. The boss reassured her that everything was fine, asking what was wrong. Nothing, I just called on my way home, Bonnie replied, embarrassed. God, Bonnie never thought she'd be so chatty. She seemed pathetic to herself. But the desire to hear his voice was the strongest thing right now. So Bonnie asked where he was going now. At the same time, she thought about how nice it would be to admire the cherry blossoms with him today. And yet, she was still bothered by what had happened yesterday. How she wished she could just see him. Bonnie regretted that she wasn't as nice as Miss Rachel. The girl's sad thoughts were interrupted by her boss's voice. He was saying he was on his way home too. Bonnie frustratedly wished him to be more careful on the road. Someone's car stopped behind the girl. She barely had time to say that they would see each other on Monday. Just as someone's familiar voice behind her back implied that Monday was a long way off. And why don't they see each other right now? God, it was the boss. What was he doing here? At this surprise, Bonnie literally opened her mouth. He just told her he was on his way home, hadn't he? Surprise froze on Bonnie's face, and a wave of pleasant warmth ran through her body. She was so happy to see him. Smiling, the boss ironically pointed out that he hadn't specified whose house he was going to. A warm, caressing breeze soaked with the scents of sakura trees filled the town on a spring evening. Bonnie and the principal were alone together for the first time since the argument in the car. Now they were walking side by side, and there was an awkward silence between them. This could use some diffusing. With those thoughts, Bonnie asked her boss if he knew what sakura blossoms meant in the language of flowers. Yeah, Nelson's tricks are so not the way to do it. The girl smiled awkwardly and said, Midterm, thus answering her own question. The mute question was read in the boss's gaze. Bonnie began to explain her answer, spelling out its meaning, but it seemed to make things worse. Why did she have to spew that nonsense? Bonnie felt embarrassed. She tried to apologize, making the excuse that Mr. Nelson could explain it much better than she could right now. The boss grinned. So that's how she was having fun with Mr. Nelson. Bonnie thought it was a mistake for her to mention him in her conversation. When asked by her boss if she enjoyed watching the cherry blossoms bloom, the girl replied that it was very beautiful, although to be honest, she didn't like it at all, because the whole time Bonnie was thinking only about him there. Bonnie wanted to say it out loud, but she didn't know if she should. She was just afraid of hearing the wrong answer. The boss decided to change the subject. He told her that he usually worked out on the weekends. Turns out he liked exercises that he could do alone, like swimming or working out at the gym. In his spare time, he just read or studied foreign languages. So that's what the boss likes. Bonnie looked rapturously at the man. Looking Bonnie straight in the eye, the boss added that today he wasn't able to do any of the things he loves. All day he couldn't concentrate, picturing the girl with someone else. I lost. Joni quietly dropped his gaze doomedly. This was a fight he couldn't win from the start. Was this man really able to say that out loud? From now on, the boss promised not to insist on marriage. Bonnie thought about the fact that she would eventually come around to it anyway. Of course, the boss wants to get married after all. It seemed to Bonnie that Rachel was a much better match than she was. But this time the boss surprised her by proposing dating. Bonnie couldn't believe her ears. Joni continued, explaining that if Bonnie didn't like the very thought of getting married, they should start by dating. The man could stand anything, but he couldn't stand even the thought of Bonnie being with another man. Whether it was marriage or casual dating, the boss had to make her his first. This desire expressed by him seemed too intrusive. Joni promised that as long as they were dating, there would be no hints or insistence on marriage on his part. He wouldn't do anything to make Bonnie feel uncomfortable. The man planned to do everything he could to make Bonnie want to get married. He would prove that he had more to offer than just his body. Holding out his hand to Bonnie, the boss said, "Please accept." Bonnie looked at his hand and didn't know what to do. But wasn't this what she had dreamed of? The boss assured the girl that if she agreed, she would never regret it. But letting him go would be regretted in the long run. Bonnie extended her hand toward his arm. Back at home, Bonnie received a text message from Kelly. She wondered if Bonnie had gotten a confession from the guy who waits until marriage. Bonnie wrote that she had received his confession, but hadn't given her answer yet. But why? The virtual friend was curious about the answer to that question too. And really why? Bonnie replied to Kelly that she'd never thought of her boss as someone to have a relationship with. Kelly stated that meant it was time to think about it now. Could she be right? He is a handsome and talented man, plus he has a good body. So why was Bonnie so hesitant? Kelly tried to reach Bonnie with messages. Bonnie was plagued by doubts. She expressed to her friend her concerns that her boss eventually wants to get married, and she doesn't want the relationship to end with a wedding. Their desires are at odds with each other from the beginning. Besides, Joni is her boss. In a message to Kelly, Bonnie quipped that if their relationship ends in a bad way, they are unlikely to be comfortable working together any further. Kelly asked her girlfriend why make things so complicated, and what's so important about values and working relationships. She just needed to think about whether or not this was a good person. Bonnie suddenly remembered the moment when he had reached out to her. At the time, she had seemed ready to give him her consent. But then, she suddenly changed her mind. Despite her boss's assurances that everything was all right, she still felt burdened. Pulling her hand away, Bonnie said she didn't want to give him false hope. "Will 6 months be enough?" the boss suddenly blurted out, looking at Bonnie. "What does he mean by that?" Bonnie looked at him curiously. Boss explained that if she didn't want to see him, or Bonnie didn't have thoughts of marriage in 6 months, then they could just break up. He didn't demand an answer from her right away. Kelly supported the girl with her messages. She wished Bonnie to find happiness by meeting a good man. Whatever path Bonnie chose, it would depend on herself. Kelly advised her to go for what her heart wanted. A new workday arrived. Meal room. Bonnie is sorting through her lunch trays. A notification pops up on her phone. I wonder who that could be. It's a text from the boss. He asks Bonnie what she's doing. Bonnie replies that she's just about to go to lunch and wonders if the boss had lunch. The principal was going to lunch too. Seconds later, Bonnie gets another text asking if she's thought about his offer. God, this man has asked that question every day since the confession. Bonnie rebuked her boss for breaking his promise not to force her to answer, to which he countered that he was just reminding her not to forget how he felt. The boss wished Bonnie would enjoy her lunch while she thought about him. Ah, such a shameless man. What can you take from him? The girl was already thinking of him all the time. Nelson entered the room. Nelson called out to Bonnie. She turned to him, chewing on something. Nelson asked the girl in surprise why she had a lunchbox. Bonnie replied that she was thinking of going on a diet. Oh, but there's one batat in there. Does that count as dieting? Bonnie asked if Nelson liked batatas. He joked that he was on one soda. Bonnie was a little annoyed by his jokes. Nelson admitted that he hadn't eaten lunch yet, and after taking the batat from Bonnie, he asked if she was lonely eating lunch like that. No. Eating alone was much more pleasant for the girl. It was unusual only at first, but with time it became more comfortable. Now she could enjoy her lunch without worrying what others would think. Nelson expressed his thoughts that if she continued to do everything alone, her love cells might die, hinting that Bonnie should start dating. Mentally, Bonnie agreed with him. Nelson suddenly perked up and offered to introduce Bonnie to a great acquaintance of his. The girl declined. The guy disappointedly held out his phone to her to show her a photo, sighing that she was wasting her time turning down such a great candidate. No, I really shouldn't, Bonnie refused before she could even look at the phone screen. What was it? On the screen was a picture of Nelson himself. He continued to wave his phone in front of Bonnie's eyes. Nelson was bragging about how handsome, promising, and age-appropriate he was for Bonnie. The girl, still eating her lunch, asked him to stop joking. Maybe he should have picked a different photo. With those thoughts, Nelson said he wasn't kidding. Looking thoughtfully at Bonnie, he admitted that he liked the girl. She was taken aback by those words. Ever since he found out that Bonnie was the kind of person who wasn't interested in marriage. What was he talking about? Bonnie was speechless with shock. The guy was surprised that despite so many hints from his side, it took so long for the girl to realize that he liked her. Though, to be honest, it was even cute for him to watch. Without letting Bonnie recover from what she'd heard, Nelson stood up from the table, dumbfounding her again. I want to go out with you, and this isn't a joke, I really want to, the guy voiced in a voice full of determination. Then he added that she shouldn't feel obligated, and if things went wrong, they could break up at any time. Nelson was eloquent, describing all the advantages of their supposed union. Bonnie continued to listen in silence, still not believing that he wasn't joking. He didn't forget to emphasize that he and Bonnie seemed to him to be perfect for each other. Smiling, he asked the girl what she had to say to him on all this. Bonnie was returning home in a complete stupor and under the impression of her conversation with Nelson today. And since when did he start liking her? The girl got off the bus. Nelson treats everyone kindly. That's why Bonnie didn't think he treated her any differently. That's what she thought. To think that two men had confessed to her in a few days. What should Bonnie do? The words Nelson had said echoed in her head. After all, people like us don't dream of a distant future with the one we love. Yes, and people like that don't need anything from each other, and they can separate without unnecessary conflicts. Bonnie's soul was torn to pieces. On the one hand, the desire to be together with the one she liked, on the other, the lack of attachment and commitment. And what to do? The girl walked, on the way thinking that an easy relationship now could be the best option for a girl. After all, such a relationship has no marital restrictions and nothing would be a burden. At these thoughts, her phone rang. It was the boss. Accept or decline. Bonnie picked up the phone. The boss inquired if she was done with work. The girl replied that she had just gotten off the bus and was now on her way home, asking him the same counter-question. Hearing that the boss was also on his way home, Bonnie wished him a good rest. She was about to end the conversation, but suddenly the man said that he missed her. Even though they had only seen each other 3 days ago, he was having a hard time without Bonnie. After sharing his feelings, the boss asked how she felt. Bonnie responded with silence. The boss asked again, "Didn't you miss me?" The girl was happy to even just get a message from him. And right now they were talking. Bonnie really did miss him. So should she still pretend she didn't understand her feelings? Deciding that she needed to be honest with herself, Bonnie answered that she missed him too. Talking as she walked, the girl didn't pay attention to anything around her, nor did she immediately notice her boss walking straight towards her. "Then let's meet right now," he suggested without hanging up the phone and walking right up to the girl. The boss? The girl was surprised. He had told her he was heading home. but because he hadn't specified to whom exactly. Bonnie looked at her boss with a puzzled look. The man pointed out that it wouldn't be fair if it was only him who was bored. He was glad it was mutual. Surprised at the look on the girl's face, the boss wondered if she was bored. "Boss, I've thought of everything," Bonnie said cryptically. What had she decided? Somewhere in the back of his mind, Johnny was very worried about her decision, so he said there was no need to rush it. No, the question she had been putting off for so long, Bonnie was determined to answer right now. The boss was tense. The girl started with preamble, saying that they don't know much about each other, but she believes they can gradually fix that. Bonnie mentioned that she and the boss are very different, but she promised to try her best to make them have more in common. The boss was trying not to miss a single word that Bonnie was saying, but he hadn't heard the main thing yet, the answer to his question. Well, why was she pulling so hard? Bonnie, meanwhile, continued her preface, emphasizing that she just wanted to live each day happy, and would do her best to do so, even though she might not be as good a woman as her boss thought of her. "But it doesn't matter," Bonnie summarized as she stepped closer to her boss. "Let's try dating," was Bonnie's final answer. The boss seemed to glow with happiness. After such a long introduction, he didn't hope to get a positive answer from the girl anymore. Business center, another working day. The director of the company is speaking in a large hall in front of a large audience. He is giving some kind of report, talking about the growth of exports, which is outstripping domestic sales. But some of the audience wasn't really listening to what he was saying. God, how can you pay attention to words when a handsome man like that is speaking? Bonnie was melting at the mere thought of dating such a perfect man. Oh yes, now he could call and text her for no particular reason. They could go out with him after work, go out on weekends. Kissing, cuddling, something more. The fantasy took Bonnie further and further away. Hey, wait, you didn't agree to be his lover just to get him into bed. The boss's gaze fell on Bonnie, sitting also in his lecture. Bonnie intercepted his gaze. Wow, that's so amazing. They looked at each other at the same time. Bonnie squinted conspiratorially. Well, now that they're together. I wonder what she was dreaming about at that moment. "You paged me, boss?" Bonnie said as she entered the principal's office. Joni sat in his chair, brooding. The man who had inhabited Bonnie's fantasies was now so close. The boss immediately turned his gaze to the girl. He motioned for Bonnie to come over. The girl was worried that something was wrong. The boss reassured her by saying that he called Bonnie because he missed her. What a relief. But there was still some tension in the girl's gaze. The girl had her own reasons to be worried. She thought that calling someone for such a personal reason was an abuse of her authority. The boss stood up from his chair. Moving closer, he reasoned that since Bonnie wouldn't allow him to talk to her in the office, he had to go through such tricks like this. Having said that, he came quite close to Bonnie. The boss wondered why the girl was keeping their relationship a secret from her co-workers, explaining that dating is not a sin, so there was no reason to hide it. But after all, for Bonnie, he is the boss, and if the colleagues find out about their relationship, they will probably start discussing it. The girl didn't want to feel uncomfortable with rumors about it. The boss had promised to draw a line between work and personal relationships, not doing any favors to Bonnie. However, she should have realized that it might look completely different in the eyes of her co-workers. Looking pleadingly at Joni, the girl asked to keep their relationship private for as long as possible. Well, since Bonnie doesn't want to, the boss won't insist. But still, the boss asked to let him know if Bonnie suddenly decided to announce it. The girl expressed her gratitude for his understanding. Saying that words of thanks would not be enough, the boss took the girl firmly by the waist and pulled her to him. Those hands. How long Bonnie had longed to feel those touches again. Then, coming right up to the girl's face, he asked in a whisper why she should not express her gratitude through action. He slowly leaned down to her lips for a kiss. The girl felt an exciting warmth throughout her body. How gentle he could be, it turned out. But Bonnie couldn't enjoy this closeness to the fullest. She wondered if it was normal. After all, they were in his office. I guess this time the kiss was doomed. Rachel entered the principal's office. She wondered aloud at Bonnie's presence in the boss's office. The boss was sitting in his chair as if nothing had happened, Bonnie standing across from him. Phew, well, they didn't seem to give themselves away. Apologizing, Rachel said she had an urgent message for the boss. Bonnie headed for the exit, resenting in her heart why this Rachel had to come now. Heading for the door, Bonnie wasn't in much of a hurry to get out. She didn't want Rachel to be alone with her boss. Still, she consoled herself with the thought that they would talk about work. Bonnie mentally talked herself out of making things up. If only it were that easy. Walking back to her workplace from her boss, Bonnie struggled to keep her cool. But there was someone waiting for her there too. Bonnie tensed a little. Oh my God, Nelson was here too. What did he want with Bonnie right now? She immediately thought back to the day he'd decided to confess to her. What a bad time for him to show up. Why now? But maybe it was time to set the record straight. Standing next to the girl on the roof of their business center, Nelson wondered why Bonnie had called him here. Wasn't it to get dumped? He suggested jokingly. Nelson assumed that he was here to get an answer to his proposal. Bonnie seemed downcast. She didn't know where to begin. However, after a brief pause, the girl did make up her mind. Apologizing, Bonnie said that she had to turn him down. Nelson was shocked by the refusal. He had expected to get such a response, but he didn't think it would be so soon. Puzzled, he wondered if Bonnie had managed to find a boyfriend in the meantime. That's right. I wonder how he found out. Nelson just assumed, but as it turned out, hit the bullseye. However, he had no intention of giving up. Nelson remarked aloud that no matter who Bonnie's chosen one was, she was still against marriage after all, which meant there was a chance they'd break up. Well, all he had to do was wait for the opportune moment. And as soon as he found an opportunity, he would take it. The boy explained that he was a hopeless romantic and should not be thought of as a small affair. The evening came on. The boss's black car pulled up not far from Bonnie's house. Getting out of the car, Bonnie said she shouldn't have to give her a ride home every time. She was worried that the boss was tired too, after all. Johnny reassured her that he wasn't tired, and it wasn't hard for him. It's not like he's carrying her in his arms. With a puzzled look, the boss suddenly asked what Bonnie had been talking to Mr. Nelson about. The girl was surprised and wondered how he knew about it. Not getting an answer, Bonnie decides to tell the boss about the offer that Nelson made to her a few days ago. She explained to the boss that she met with Nelson today to say no. Bonnie passionately began to tell him how she had gone to see the cherry blossoms with him without even realizing his intentions. The boss noted that it was obvious in his opinion and wondered how Bonnie could have overlooked it. The girl excused herself, saying that nothing had ever connected them, and she couldn't think that she liked him. The boss began to admonish Bonnie to be more careful from now on, because men were capable of misinterpreting even a small sign of attention. Bonnie indignantly pointed out that the boss was always surrounded by female co-workers too, to which she received the objection that the boss never did anything that could be misunderstood. But Miss Rachel was an exception, Bonnie huffed out with a frown, remembering the ill-fated box of cookies she had handed him. The boss looked at Bonnie with bewilderment. What was she talking about? The girl reminded him of how he had taken the cookies baked by Miss Rachel. Bonnie assumed he had liked it. The boss didn't deny accepting the gift, assuring Bonnie that he didn't like the cookies. Bonnie was unstoppable. She dared to admit that she'd seen her and Rachel outside the office building. However, the boss explained that it wasn't a private conversation, but about work. That was it, and he had an answer for all of it. There was one more thing that worried Bonnie. Why had he bought Rachel that coffee? It was Bonnie's favorite coffee, by the way. The boss stated that it was the first time he had heard of it. Bonnie looked at him incredulously. Only the boss had no reason to lie and reassured Bonnie that he wouldn't have deceived her. So then why had Rachel told her that? Business center, a new day at work. Something unusual is happening in the office where Bonnie worked. Today, the boss is treating everyone to coffee, explaining his gesture as a bonus from him for their hard work the last few days. The employees are happy about this surprise. After he leaves, everyone starts to discuss it vividly. What's gotten into the boss? He was against eating during work hours, wasn't he? Bonnie stood pondering. Why did he only buy mocha, she wondered. Oh, that's right. Bonnie remembered asking her boss why he bought Rachel's coffee but never bought hers. He must have remembered that. The girl enjoyed her favorite beverage with gusto. How nice that boss decided to please her in this way. Rachel was also in the office. What kind of mysterious person was she? She was just observing everything that was going on, and it was unclear from her facial expression neither what she was feeling nor what she was thinking. As she sat down at her desk, glancing at Rachel in passing, Bonnie wondered why she had lied to her. Her thoughts took her back to the moment when her boss had said he wouldn't lie to her. Ha ha ha. And that night, Bonnie had remembered to even ask about the doggy keychain in her boss's car. When he had explained to her that it was a gift from her mom, Bonnie suspected the boss was involved with Rachel, so she questioned him about it. For some reason, the boss was amused by her suspicions. He asked her to tell him everything at once in the future and not to keep it to herself if she had any such thoughts. It would help them avoid misunderstandings. If this is a common misunderstanding, could Bonnie have asked Rachel about it? No, how could she even ask that? On the other hand, she shouldn't really care about Rachel anymore. After all, Bonnie is now the boss's girlfriend. For now, all she has to think about is her relationship with Joni. There's another text from Kelly. She asks if Bonnie has made any progress. In the correspondence, Bonnie replies that they are dating, so she is okay with them taking things slow. To which Kelly objects, prodding the girl that now is not the time to procrastinate and she should start taking action. He's not like other men. He's going to wait until after the wedding and act as discreet as possible. Guys like that take a different approach to winning hearts. Wow, maybe Kelly could give Bonnie the right approach to her boss. I should write that down just in case. Local city park. It's beautiful spring weather outside. There are people walking around, and the sounds of sweet music coming from somewhere. Ah, what a wonderfully romantic atmosphere. Bonnie approached her boss, who was looking at his watch, looking for someone. The girl asked how long he had been waiting, explaining that he should have texted her as soon as he got there. After reassuring the girl that everything was fine, the boss said that he hadn't noticed how time had flown by. Wow, he looks very different in his off hours. The boss looked at Bonnie questioningly. She was so lightly dressed, even though it was April outside and still chilly. So Joni wondered if the girl was cold. Bonnie, meanwhile, was going over in her head Kelly's tips for seducing a man, and one of them was to wear sexy clothes. That's why she wore this, almost weightless dress today. Bonnie assured her boss that she could easily tolerate the cold temperatures, and she wasn't cold at all. She was determined to be irresistible on this day. Yes, Bonnie, everything has to go perfectly. Today will be the big day. In fact, Bonnie was lying. The girl was really cold. So much so that she started shivering and she had a runny nose. Sitting down on the bench, she mentally sent those sexy clothes to hell. "You okay?" Offering a handkerchief, the boss clarified. He saw that the girl was cold, so he offered the plaid that was in his car. But Bonnie stubbornly maintained that she was fine, and she just might have caught a cold last night because of her poor sleep. Why had she stayed up so late? That question troubled the chief too, since it was their first date, and he couldn't help but ask Bonnie about it. The girl explained that she couldn't sleep from excitement. Johnny's look betrayed his feelings. He was worried about Bonnie. He put his hand on Bonnie's arm, and leaning over he said, "You don't feel well. Maybe we should go home." Oh, why did that sound so sexy? Evening came. After walking the girl back to the house, the boss thanked her for today. Bonnie agreed that she'd had a great time too. Looking at the girl, the boss noted that Bonnie seemed to have a cold and needed to go home and rest soon. Would he really just leave like that? Bonnie took his hand. There was a second pause. After that, she said she needed to change the light bulb in the living room because she couldn't do it herself. Ha, well done, Bonnie. That was resourceful, though corny. The boss looked at Bonnie. I wonder if he guessed she had made it up. Nevertheless, he agreed. They went into the house. The boss, screwdriver in hand, went to change the light bulb. He did the job like a pro. To think the man must be good at everything. Bonnie looked at her boss and remembered the second seduction lesson from Kelly. She had to find a place where it could be just the two of them. Done. All that remained was to create the right atmosphere. The girl made coffee for the two of them. The boss, meanwhile, finished his work and went downstairs to Bonnie, who brought a tray of cups. The girl suggested that there would be a downpour today. Joni didn't want to take her hint, and after informing her that he had already changed the light bulb, was about to leave. What do you mean, leave? No, Bonnie couldn't let that happen. The boss was worried that the girl needed a rest, so he was in a hurry to leave before it was too late. To Bonnie's objections that she always fell asleep late, Johnny suggested that that was probably the reason for her state of health. Wouldn't she be able to do anything to make him stay? Bonnie decided to ask her boss if he had any business meetings tomorrow. He said he didn't. What if the man was in such a hurry because he had secrets from Bonnie? The girl went over in her head in a second the many excuses that could make him stay here tonight. The coffee on the tray was already starting to get cold. Bonnie decided that everything was ingeniously simple, so putting all her thoughts aside, She simply offered to let her boss sleep over at her place. "Tomorrow's a day off, and it's pouring rain outside," Bonnie continued to persuade him. Besides, she'd made coffee. Bonnie clarified that she wasn't implying anything, but after all, they're dating, and so, yep, and who she's trying to fool. But the boss reiterated that he was going to keep his virginity until marriage, and he wasn't going to do it before the wedding. Bonnie promised that she would just hold his hand, and he shouldn't worry. And why should she be the one to tell this popular lie of men? Johnny took the coffee from the girl, who must have gotten tired of holding it by now. "Only the thing is," the man began intriguingly, placing the tray of cups on the table. And picking the girl up in his arms, he added that just holding hands wouldn't be enough for him. Bonnie even shrieked from such a surprise. These spontaneous actions of his were driving the girl crazy. Pulling back the edge of her dress a little on her chest, he was saying that Bonnie's reaction was pleasing to him. It made him want to tease her even more, but it was getting harder and harder to restrain himself. Would he be able to just fall asleep next to such a beautiful girl? Bonnie opened the door to the bedroom. On the bed in the room was a heart lined with rose petals. In her mind, Bonnie had time to wonder if she had gone overboard. The boss put her on the bed, and leaning with his hands hovered over the girl, looking into her eyes full of desire and at the same time, surprise. Bonnie's heart was ready to jump out. Kissing every finger of her hand, he whispered that he wanted her all over, from head to toe. The girl literally melted at his words. Looking at Bonnie with a confident look, he added, without missing a single spot. Having said that, he went straight down to the girl's neck, covering every millimeter of her soft skin with sensual kisses. His hands confidently slid lower and lower down her body. Bonnie was slowly going crazy. How long the girl had waited for this moment. Joni suddenly pulled back sharply, worriedly noticing that Bonnie was too hot. The flushed girl tried to convince him that it didn't matter now, and that she was hot from arousal. But the boss was sure that Bonnie had a fever. He cared more about her condition than the night they spent together. Frustrated by his concern at such an inopportune time, Bonnie still continued to assure him that she was fine, eager to get on with what she had started. Joni didn't listen to her, going to the pharmacy to get some medicine. Bonnie never gave up trying to stop him, but she really didn't look well. Bonnie's eyes suddenly began to blur. God, she didn't know what was happening to her. Her mind whirled with the thought that she couldn't let an opportunity like this go to waste. The room finally swam and the girl lost consciousness. A hospital room. Bonnie came to, not realizing what had happened or where she was. A worried boss was sitting next to her. He asked how the girl was feeling. Bonnie was feeling better. Fortunately, it turned out to be a common cold. The girl had been given all the help she needed and should be better soon. Bonnie was upset, apologizing that because of her, their first date had ended before it could begin. She shouldn't have worn such an revealing dress in April. It looked like she'd ruined it. Joni reassured the girl, stroking her cheek that it wasn't her fault that she was sick. He asked her to rest properly, promising to give her Monday off. As he left, he looked at Bonnie intriguingly. She was bound to feel better soon, but in the meantime, she needed to build up her strength so they could continue. What? Bonnie didn't hear him say anything about continuing? Yeah, that's exactly what he said. The business center, a few days later. Bonnie walked into the office, showered with tons of questions from coworkers about how she was feeling. Bonnie was feeling much better by now. The girls in the office noted that Bonnie was pretty dressed up today and started asking if anyone had shown up at her place. Gosh, she'd have to be careful not to give herself away. Bonnie's workflow was just automatic today. She was typing something, but her thoughts were far away from her work. Continuation was the only word that haunted her from the hospital walls. Suddenly, the phone rang. Who could it be? Glancing at the phone, Bonnie's face instantly darkened. It was her ex-boyfriend calling. What did he want? They had broken up 2 years ago. What had prompted him to suddenly dial her number again? Maybe something serious had happened. Bonnie was worried. However, she quickly pulled herself together. Bonnie dismissed the call, deciding that since it was over between them, she shouldn't care about his problems. At the same time, Rachel's work cell phone rang. Rachel answered, introducing her department. Turning to Bonnie, Rachel asked if she knew anyone named Colleen Garris. Bonnie interjected in surprise. Yes, of course, Bonnie knew who it was that was calling, and she asked Rachel to switch the call to her line. The call was switched over, and Bonnie picked up the phone. A painfully familiar voice came from the phone. It was her ex-boyfriend calling again. In an official tone, Bonnie inquired about the case she'd gotten the call about. Colin was flustered. He explained that he couldn't get through to her, so he had to call the office. He had a very important conversation to have with her. Bonnie had long ago dotted the line with the man, so without letting Colin finish speaking, the girl said that he had the wrong number. Bonnie, not wanting to hear anything, just hung up the phone. And yet, this call really alarmed the girl. It seemed that something was really wrong with that mama's boy. The shadow of the past with this man did not leave Bonnie's present alone. Why is it that just when things were starting to get better in her life, circumstances were bound to appear that could change everything? Miss Rachel, sitting nearby, had been listening to every word of her colleague. Now she wondered who he was to Bonnie, this Colin Garris. Local town cafe, another meeting of colleagues. At one of the tables, the office staff are discussing a rather unusual event. Someone was surprised that their fellow manager, Matthew Finch, had gotten married. There were rumors that his family was very rich. Maybe this fact helped such a miracle to happen. Rachel, after thinking about it, stated that she could hardly marry a man she didn't love, regardless of his fortune. She also noted that trust and responsibility to the partner, the basic conditions for marriage. Gemma agreed with Rachel's statements, noticing how Rachel was changing when it came to marriage. Ah, yes, she was literally glowing. Such words made Rachel lower her gaze in embarrassment. The complete opposite of Miss Bonnie, right? Kim said with a smile, glancing wryly at Bonnie sitting next to her. She, on the other hand, seemed to be thinking about something of her own. Of course, Bonnie had been listening to everything, and that was because she couldn't stop thinking about that phone call. Meanwhile, everyone's attention turned back to Rachel. Gemma suddenly remembered Rachel saying that her ideal type was someone like their boss, and Kim remarked that the two would look great together. "So why don't you two start dating?" she added. Bonnie was wary. As it turned out, Rachel herself was very much on board with getting close to her boss. The only problem was that he didn't let many people get close to him. Rachel would love to get him to get close to her. Kim and Gemma perked up. Office romance and intrigue. They promised Rachel they'd help her win the boss, assuring her that she wouldn't have to wait long for him to fall in love with her. With a conspiratorial smile, Rachel thanked her newfound friends. Bonnie found the whole conversation even more thought-provoking. Evening, a corporate meeting at the Coco Chicken Cafe. Appetizing pieces of meat are flying away from the meat plate one by one at the speed of light. Looks like someone was in a hurry to eat it all. Oh, right. That's Manager Matthew. He was the one eating the food, leaving Bonnie and Nelson, who were sitting across the table, stunned. Bonnie was baffled that this man could get married. Despite his co-workers cajoling, Matthew replied that the meat had to be eaten quickly so that it would fit. This man was so engrossed in the process that others might not have gotten a bite. Nelson still managed to win back at least one piece, carefully placing it on Bonnie's plate. The girl thanked him and thought about how awkward it was to be sitting next to Nelson now, after rejecting him. Mr. Nelson, however, seemed to be completely oblivious to that. That's a good thing. At the table, suddenly one of the employees remarked aloud how good Rachel and the boss looked together. "No, how many times can we do this?" Bonnie tensed. The boss, judging by the look on his face, didn't care about this conversation, unlike Rachel, sitting next to him. She, naively embarrassed, smiled. "Boss, what kind of girls do you like?" someone addressed Joni. But he didn't hesitate to reply that he didn't think about such things. "Maybe you are attracted to girls who have family building as a priority. Isn't that the best partner for marriage?" They kept pestering the boss with questions. Rachel visibly tensed. One awkward movement of her hand and the beer bottle flew off the table. Did she do that on purpose? The boss's reaction was instantaneous. He picked up the falling bottle on the fly. However, his pants and Rachel's pants had already gotten covered in beer. Rachel started apologizing, trying to shake off and wipe the boss's pants. God, what was she doing? Her hand seemed to linger on her boss's pants a little higher than it should. That woman, what is she touching there? Bonnie was shocked at what was happening. The boss pulled Rachel back. After removing her hand and assuring her that he was fine, the boss recommended that Rachel take better care of herself. The girl tried with all her appearance to show that she was sorry. Bonnie was silently indignant. Her disappointed look was hard to miss, and Matthew noticed her confusion. Yes, now he was going to get this girl off his back. Reinvigorated, Matthew suggested that Bonnie introduce her to someone. She firmly declined. God, the manager was at it again. The refusal only enraged Matthew, and he eloquently began to impose on some son of his acquaintance. The manager urged Bonnie to meet him just once, arguing that he was handsome, rich, and from a good family. He didn't seem to hear any objections. Seeing that Bonnie couldn't handle Matthew's verbal assault, Nelson stood up for the girl, emphasizing that she was against marriage. Matthew was outraged. How is it that she doesn't want to get married, even in a country with such a low birth rate? Oh dear. Matthew was unstoppable. He continued to lecture Bonnie in an indignant tone, reproaching her for the fact that the younger generation these days thinks only of themselves, not caring at all about the country. The girl sat in a stupor. She listened silently to all his arguments about the disadvantages of single life, and that if she were so fastidious, she would not marry at all, and would remain an old maid. In conclusion, Matthew advised that if there was a suitable man, grab him quickly. Finally, Bonnie's patience came to an end. Looking indignantly at the manager, she asked, "If I become unhappy after marriage, will you take responsibility in such a case?" Matthew had not expected such a question. Saying this, Bonnie plunged back into her distant past, back to when she was just a child. Still in her memories, she continued, explaining that marriage not only affects her life, but also the lives of many other people. Would Matthew be willing to take responsibility for the pain that both she and others might experience because of the decision? Bonnie expressed her opinion that one should not rashly commit to marriage if one does not have the desire and intention to protect one's family. Nelson looked at Bonnie in surprise. It seemed that behind these words of the girl hid a deep pain from her past experience. As he finished his speech, Bonnie emphasized that if he was unable to take responsibility for it, then let him not dare to force her into marriage. Not just her, but others as well. It seemed that those words applied not only to Matthew, but to everyone at the table. There was an awkward silence after Bonnie's words. What was there to say? Then the co-workers began to whisper that the manager shouldn't have said so much. Colleagues threw judgmental glances and phrases in his direction. Matthew wasn't even happy that he had started this conversation. Bonnie stood up abruptly from her desk, announcing that she needed to use the restroom. The boss wondered, what could this girl have been going through that made her react so painfully to the very notion of marriage? While in the restroom, Bonnie cooled down a little and came to her senses. Now her conscience was tormenting her, and she blamed herself. Yeah, she'd gotten mad at Matthew over nothing. Knowing the manager's temper, he would surely use today's situation to harass the girl later. On the other hand, Bonnie was relieved when she spoke up. And anyway, he doesn't dare to talk about it so easily, not knowing why the girl became anti-marriage. Bonnie was calming herself aloud in front of the restroom mirror. At that moment, Rachel enters the restroom. Bonnie looked at her through her reflection in the mirror and thought that after what was said there at the table, she had nothing to fear today. She called out to Rachel. She stopped. Turning to her, Bonnie decided to ask why Rachel had lied to her about her boss buying her coffee. Ah, good for Bonnie. You can't keep all that worry to yourself. Rachel was caught off guard by the question. Still, she turned to Bonnie and wryly asked if it mattered so much to Bonnie whether she had lied then or not. Bonnie, suddenly to herself, blurted out, "Yes, it does, because I care about him." That's how. Rachel took a step toward Bonnie. Approaching Bonnie at a rather awkward distance and looking her straight in the eye, Rachel said confidently, "I guess we're rivals from this day forward." Leaving the cafe, the boss, along with Bonnie, got into his car parked in the parking lot. Boss had been drinking a bit today, so he summoned the driver, asking Bonnie to wait for a while. For a while they both sat in silence, each thinking about something else. Today's incident had gotten them both thinking. Bonnie rubbed her hands together nervously. She wondered if she should or should not have told her boss about Colin Garris's call. Oh, too much had happened during the company dinner. On top of that, Bonnie had learned just how interested Rachel was in her boss. The girl didn't know how she was going to deal with all of this now. The boss sensed Bonnie's tension, so he supported her, asking her not to take the manager's words to heart. Ah, if only it was just about him. Bonnie was looking somewhere in the distance, and her gaze seemed troubled. The boss kept encouraging the girl, emphasizing that he had offered to sit next to her. If she'd listened to him, the whole drunken Matthew moralizing thing might not have happened. "Next time, make sure you sit next to me," the boss asked. Bonnie looked down in frustration as she tried to sit next to him. However, all the female employees had the same desire. How was Bonnie supposed to act in this case? Speaking of which, Bonnie blurted out abruptly, and immediately turning to her boss, the girl continued by saying that he had asked her not to be nice to other men, and he himself was not behaving any better. What is she talking about? The boss looked at Bonnie in surprise. Bonnie explained that she'd been watching him sit with Miss Rachel all evening, drinking and chatting sweetly. Anyone would have thought that his lover was Miss Rachel, not Bonnie. After listening to the girl, the boss asked, "Does she bother you that much?" Bonnie hesitated. Of course, Rachel bothered her, especially after that conversation in the restroom. The boss had suggested just telling her about them, saying they were together wouldn't have to worry anymore. Bonnie was perplexed as to how they could tell her about it. After all, if Rachel found out, everyone would know about their relationship. "I don't mind everyone finding out," the boss reminded her, puzzled. The only way Bonnie would be okay with that was if one of them left the company. Boss had no way of knowing why she wouldn't want to reveal their relationship if this situation bothered Bonnie so much. "It'll be fine while we're dating, but what are we going to do when we break up?" the girl blurted out, and abruptly cut off the phrase before finishing. Oh God, why did she have to say that? A tense second silence hung in the car. Realizing that she had made a mistake, Bonnie began to justify that it wasn't what she had meant to say, and that they both couldn't know how things would turn out in the end. But what's said is said. The boss was upset. He was surprised at the girl's attitude. He thought aloud that this was just the beginning for him, but it looked like Miss Bonnie was ready to leave him at any moment. It seemed the girl's words had hurt him to the core. Back home, Bonnie threw herself on the bed in despair. From a bag tossed carelessly on the floor, her cell phone fell out. A text from Kelly had come in. It was as if she knew the best time to text Bonnie. Kelly asked what it was like to date after a long hiatus, wondering if Bonnie missed her boss at the mere thought of him. Bonnie was mentally depressed and shattered. Maybe at least a virtual friend would share that pain with her. In another of her messages, Kel suggested that if things kept going this way, maybe she'd get an invitation to the wedding this fall. Reading all those messages, Bonnie found nothing better to do than respond by calling herself a pathetic and stupid woman. Emotions came over the girl and she cried. Tears filled her eyes, and at that moment it seemed to Bonnie that because of her stupidity, no one could love the girl. How bitter and bad Bonnie felt right now. After breaking up with that jerk, the girl was convinced that eternal love did not exist, that any relationship would sooner or later come to an end. That's why Bonnie thought that completely trusting someone and dreaming about a future together was childish nonsense. Because of her mistrust, she hurt the man who had always been sincere and cared for her. Their relationship hasn't even started normally yet, but Bonnie has already decided on the end. Absorbed in the past, lost sight of reality. The business center, a new day at work. Someone knocked on the director's office. The boss invited them in. Slender legs and heels timidly entered the office. Approaching the boss's desk, Bonnie said in an uncertain voice that she wanted to apologize for yesterday. She was very sorry for what she had said yesterday, realizing that her words might have hurt Joni badly. I wonder if Bonnie were in his shoes, how she would feel. The boss calmly replied that he understood the girl's feelings, and he has no intention of blaming Bonnie for the fact that their values and desires don't match in everything. Wow, he says he understands her, although Bonnie sometimes couldn't understand herself. Bonnie stared in wonder at the man, listening to what he would tell her next. He certainly seemed perfect to the girl. Admitting that he had never looked at anyone the way he looked at Bonnie before, the boss promised that nothing would be a reason for him to leave her. Even if Bonnie decided to dump him first, his feelings would remain the same. Bonnie left her boss's office with mixed feelings. As soon as she entered her department, Nelson had already greeted her with an offer to take a break in the break room. Bonnie, responding with her crowning phrase, proceeded past him to her workstation. She was crying. A mute question lingered in Nelson's eyes. God, what's wrong with Bonnie? Meanwhile, the boss in his office was contemplating the fact that he apparently hadn't fully realized the extent of the pain Bonnie had gone through. Hadn't he done everything he could to avoid burdening her? The boss realized that in order for the girl to open up, he had to get close to her first. He waited patiently for Bonnie herself to tell him about her past, but apparently his efforts were not enough. His musings and self-exploration were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. The boss invited him in. This time it was Nelson. He placed a folder on the desk, informing him that it contained the report the boss had requested. At the boss's mention that the deadline was the day after tomorrow, Nelson offered to take a look at it right away, since the report was already ready. Barely had the director touched the folder before Nelson pronounced that he wanted him to know something. Ooh, that was a promising start. Looking at the chief, the guy confidently stated that he usually doesn't take what belongs to others, much less if it involves the boss. Therefore, he would advise the boss to better hold on to what he cherishes so much. What's he talking about? Joni seemed to be beginning to understand. But still, he continued to stare silently at the suddenly daring guy. Without averting his gaze, and without diminishing the confidence in his voice, Nelson emphasized that now he had a good opportunity to steal someone from the boss. Business center, evening, end of the workday. Rachel was alone in the office. Apparently, this person was trying to get something out of the place. Well, of course she was interested in Bonnie's computer. Trouble was, it was password protected. Rachel was annoyed. She'd worked so hard to join the development department because of Joni Moore, and here was Bonnie. She's opposing the marriage, pretending to be disinterested to her boss, while at the same time, Bonnie has feelings for him. Pondering, Rachel began to bite her nails nervously. Could it be that Bonnie knows what kind of person he is, which is why she's clinging to her boss so insistently? With these thoughts, Rachel stepped into the elevator. She was filling herself with hope that she should just put in a little more effort, and Johnny Moore would fall in love with her. She'd try again tomorrow. But in order to make it work, Rachel would need to find Miss Bonnie Hill's weak spot as soon as possible. With these thoughts, Rachel walked over to the development office. There, a security guard tried to stop one guy who was trying to enter the development office. But he was asked to leave the room, noting that he was drunk and that he was not allowed to enter without a pass. Oh my God, that guy is none other than Colin, Bonnie's ex. He kept trying to get into the office and exclaimed that he wanted to see his Bonnie. The security guard, upon hearing the familiar name, clarified if Colin worked in that department. Meanwhile, Rachel, who had accidentally witnessed the scene, was thinking about the timing of her arrival. Colin kept asking for Bonnie to be called. Rachel couldn't pass up such a marvelous chance. "Bonnie?" she interjected cheerfully, turning to the guy. "Oh, I suppose you're Colin Garris?" she clarified, stepping closer to the guy. The guy wondered in surprise how the girl knew his name. Rachel didn't know for sure. She just put the puzzle together in her head about that phone call the guy had demanded of Bonnie and about this situation now. And oh wonder, she wasn't wrong. Jubilant in her heart, Rachel answered the guy's question, explaining that she had often heard about him from Miss Bonnie. Her co-worker's first impression of Rachel was correct after all, sly as a fox. Meanwhile, Bonnie is considering a wedding invitation at dinner. Her friend Lila had specially invited Bonnie to dinner to present this invitation. She marveled at the beauty of the card and heartily congratulated her friend on her marriage. Lila asked if Bonnie would come to the celebration. The girl promised her friend that she would. Lila didn't forget to ask her friend the very question that had been haunting Bonnie lately, whether she was dating someone or whether she should be introduced to some man. But Bonnie assured her that she already had someone. To Lila's questions about who he was, Bonnie answered in generalities, without giving too much information, and without mentioning her boss's name. Her friend was genuinely happy about the news, suggesting aloud that Bonnie was getting married soon too. Bonnie, however, was quick to object that she wasn't thinking about marriage. Lila wondered, perplexed, if the man Bonnie was dating wasn't a good husband. Bonnie glumly replied that the problem was her own, not his. Was this really about Bonnie's ex? Lila mentioned the ex, since she knew that Bonnie had dated him for a long time in the past and had even said she wanted to marry him. Bonnie agreed that Colin had partly influenced that stance of hers now. But he wasn't the only reason. Beyond that, she had simply stopped having illusions about marriage. Glancing at her friend, Lila noted that she hadn't dreamed of marriage either. But one sudden feeling made her change her mind, and she would regret for the rest of her life if she lost this man. Picturing her boss for a moment, Bonnie said, "I can trust him," and continuing to think of Johnny, the girl added that as long as he was happy with Bonnie, so was she. Looking at her puzzled friend, Lila expressed the thought that it wasn't a bad idea to marry someone who evoked such feelings. Bonnie wondered. Lila seemed to be up to something. She had asked Bonnie to invite her boyfriend to the wedding. She was curious to see what kind of person he was. How does she envision it? Bonnie decided to call her boss for the first time since that corporate dinner. The boss informed her that he was on his way home and asked if her and her friend had finished their meeting. Bonnie replied that she too had gone home as soon as she said goodbye. Should she really invite him to her friend's wedding? With those thoughts in mind, Bonnie voiced her suggestion aloud to her boss, noting that her friends would like to meet him. The boss was fine with it. However, he was worried that he might not like Bonnie's friends. The girl assured him that there wasn't a man in this world. Who wouldn't like a man like the boss? Sighing, Johnny shared that he used to be indifferent when others said such things, but from Bonnie's words, it felt different. Bonnie asked how he was feeling right now. Boss felt that if Bonnie were beside him right now, he would pull her to him and hug her tightly, and he would tell her that, of course. Would he have known how much Bonnie dreamed of it? Listening to the gentle voice of the boss, the girl thought about the fact that they would have only happy moments. Therefore, there should not be any unpleasant events in their relationship. With these thoughts, Bonnie suggested to her boss to meet if he had time now, but at that moment, an ex appeared behind her like the ghost of Hamlet's father. He called out to the girl who was engrossed in the conversation. Oh my God! Bonnie nearly died from that unexpected voice behind her. A drunken Colin was yelling indignantly how she could have never once contacted him after the breakup. And how did he just find her here? Bonnie screamed that he didn't dare show up at her like that, and if he was on his way to a drinking party, he'd gotten the wrong street number. Colin clarified that he understood her feelings. He believed that Bonnie had missed her, but hadn't called because of resentment. Did he mean it? Bonnie looked at the guy with genuine surprise. He, catching her gaze, clarified that Bonnie's coworker had told him everything. Ha! What's he talking about, coworker? It looked like Bonnie had added to her problems. Suddenly, Colin reached for Bonnie with his hand. Trying to touch the girl, he asked her to start over, reassuring Bonnie that he wasn't saying this because he was drunk, but because he still loved her. Oh God, he mentioned his mother again, trying to explain to the girl that he would talk her down. Bonnie was disgusted with the man. She tried to stop his pathetic speeches by saying that she had no feelings left for Colin. She never wished to see him like that again. Having gotten quite drunk, the man began to get angry. He asked if the man Bonnie had been with under the umbrella that rainy day was the culprit. Bonnie, who was about to leave, said that he shouldn't care who she was dating. Colin was furious. He was angry that he thought he was the only one suffering. The hurt ego was especially palpable under the influence of alcohol. The man began shouting reproaches at Bonnie for the fact that no sooner had they separated than she ran to another man that Colin didn't even know about. He angrily inquired if Bonnie was going to marry that man, sarcastically clarifying if the man knew about her family's low status. He didn't forget to mention her father, who drank, and her mother, who had left home when Bonnie was only 7 years old. Bonnie stood to herself. Those words plunged her headfirst into the past, reminding her of all the things she was desperately trying to forget. Colleen, who had gotten the hang of his own speech, added vehemently that no man in his right mind would want to marry a girl from a house like that. Pounding his chest, he claimed that he was the only one who could save Bonnie. There's no telling how long the scumbag's desperate screams would have lasted if someone hadn't stopped it all with a punch right in his drunken face. Colin passed out. "Boss?" the girl stammered in surprise, managing to hide behind his back. "Who the hell are you?" the boss asked. Looking disdainfully at the dumbfounded guy, he added that if he gibbered anymore, he wouldn't be able to use his mouth anymore. Wow, Johnny Moore is just the hero of the evening tonight. Taking Bonnie's hand firmly, the boss hurried to get the girl out of there. Colin remained somewhere behind, desperately crawling around looking for his glasses that had come off from the blow. Bonnie was trying to figure out from her boss how he'd gotten here. They were walking fast, the houses and streetlights changing one after another. Bonnie was getting so tired of this pace. She asked her boss to at least let her catch her breath. From the whole situation, she was still struggling to come to her senses. Bonnie looked at her hands, mentally noting that even though everything was behind her, they were still shaking. God, had the boss heard everything Colleen Garris had said? The boss took off his jacket. Seeing that Bonnie was shivering, he decided to calm her down a little and warm her up by slipping the jacket over her shoulders. Touching her shoulder, he noted that it would have been better if Bonnie had said something before ending the call. Did she really want to tackle a drunken man alone? The boss perplexedly asked why Bonnie hadn't dialed him and why she was trying to solve everything alone. "What if something had happened to you?" he reproached the girl kindly. At these words, Bonnie rushed to her boss, and with all her might, with both arms, embraced him. How good and safe she felt now. The boss looked up at Bonnie. He seemed like a huge wall next to this defenseless girl. She hugged her boss tighter and sighed, and in a calm voice she assured him that everything was okay. Meanwhile, night was already falling. The boss bought fruit tea for Bonnie. It was too late for coffee, and the girl could use some warmth. The two of them sat on the bench in silence for a while. Bonnie drank her tea, and the boss just sat next to her. Each was thinking about something different. However, there was a rather thin line between simple silence and awkward silence. Bonnie wondered why the boss wasn't asking anything about Colin. He must have been curious about him. Probably by his silence, he was letting Bonnie know that if she didn't want to, she didn't have to tell him anything about what had happened. What if he already had an idea of what kind of relationship Bonnie had with that man? If Bonnie didn't say anything to her boss now, she and he would be a happy couple again, as if nothing had ever happened. However, Bonnie didn't want to hide anything from him anymore, and even if his feelings for her cooled afterward, he needed to hear her story. So Bonnie decided to start her story, and she began by admitting that the man who had been hit by the boss was Colin Garris, and he was her ex. The boss didn't seem very surprised by the news. Seeing the girl's excitement, the boss calmed her down, saying that she didn't have to force herself if she didn't want to. But Bonnie wanted to tell everything to everyone, at least to him. Bonnie and Colin had been together for 4 years during university, and for the first few years of their relationship with him, Bonnie didn't think about marriage. Already at that time, the girl was pessimistic about marriage. However, after spending a lot of time with this man, Bonnie thought that it would be nice to play a wedding. Oh, and Colin had often talked about getting married too. One morning, he said that he and Bonnie needed to break up. The reason for this was the categorical rejection of their wedding by his parents. After that, the girl made a decision never to dream of a joint future and not to marry anyone. Bonnie stopped trusting people, and therefore could not build a serious relationship. She decided that it was better to be alone than to be betrayed by someone again. This lifestyle gradually became a habit. After briefly telling her story, Bonnie summarized it by enthusiastically adding that then a boss came into her life. At the mention of the boss, the girl became animated, and she continued her story more cheerfully. She told how she saw her boss the first time they met. At that time, she thought that they were completely unsuitable for each other. However, when they became closer to each other, Bonnie realized that the boss was just a wonderful person, kind, very attentive, with a strong sense of responsibility. Saying this, the girl looked into her boss's eyes, penetrating, it seemed, into his very soul. Bonnie emphasized that at times she found it hard to believe that such a cool and perfect man had become her lover. No matter how much Bonnie talked, the image of an enraged Colin popped up in her mind every now and then, talking about her father and the status of Bonnie's family. A girl could hide her past, but after all, everything secret one day becomes revealed. Oh, and Johnny Moore had always been honest with her. He cared about her feelings. He was willing to wait for her. It was time to be sincere to Bonnie, too. With her head down, Bonnie admitted to her boss that there was one more thing the girl had to tell him. And the girl began to tell what had so troubled her soul and prevented her from living normally all these years. The first thing she remembered was her mother, who always regretted the birth of her daughter and left when the girl was barely 7. The father, after the mother left, began to drink heavily, and his hatred was directed at little Bonnie because she looked so much like her mother. One day, her father almost left a scar on Bonnie's back. Even after school was over, Bonnie was afraid to come home, so she would wait somewhere in the yard until her father was completely drunk and asleep. She often came home very late, and being hungry, she had to eat noodles. She had to eat so quietly that God forbid she woke up her father. The boss's eyes were filled with mute pain. Oh, how much strength it took for that girl to just survive. Bonnie added sadly that her parents' unhappy married life had left a deep imprint on her that still bothered her to this day. Finishing her tea, Bonnie mentioned that she agreed with what her ex had said, that if you wanted to get married, you had to reckon with the environment and family that the other person had lived with. Folding her hands in a lock, Bonnie was apparently about to say something most important. Her hands were shaking desperately, but she still resolved to say that if her boss wanted to marry her, it would be best to deal with it right now. Oh God, how worried she was at that moment. With tears in her eyes, and still trembling, the girl had doomedly said that there had never been a moment when she had been happy living with her family. So Bonnie was sure that she couldn't make a happy family. She lamented that she didn't know what a normal spouse or mother should be like. Bonnie worried that marrying her would only hurt her boss, or her child would suffer as she did. What could Bonnie do then? Now, through the lips of this girl, spoke that little frightened Bonnie who did not wish such a fate for others. The girl burst into tears, telling her boss to think before it was too late. A strong male arm put his arm around Bonnie's shoulders. The boss put his arm around the girl and began stroking her hair, gently pressing her head against his face. It felt so good and warm in his embrace that Bonnie immediately calmed down. He comforted her with the reasoning that not all men in the world are like that man, and not all parents end up like Bonnie's parents. And just because a parent's life was wrong didn't mean a child should live the same life. If Bonnie didn't know how to be happy now, her boss offered to teach her how. Looking the girl straight in the eye, he said he believed in her. Bonnie, on the other hand, also seemed to trust someone for the first time in a long time. The boss assured her that Bonnie could be a good wife and a great mom. She was more entitled to a happy life than anyone else. The boss promised to be there for her if painful memories bothered the girl again. He promised to do whatever it took to make Bonnie happy. Ah, what a beautiful thing to say. Just don't get burned this time. The look in his eyes convinced Bonnie better than any words that she could trust him. The boss asked her to believe in him as much as he believed in Bonnie. Yeah, there were a lot of tears coming down. Sighing tiredly, Bonnie said, "I think I've cried all my tears." Her boss looked at her and said affectionately that was good, because from now on she wouldn't have to cry anymore. Thanking the man, Bonnie admitted that he made her feel as if she had let out everything she had been saving deep in her heart. Bonnie really wanted to be someone for her boss to rely on, so she asked him to be sure to speak up if ever the boss felt tired, or if something serious suddenly happened. The boss already felt her support, just even from Bonnie's words like that. Bonnie thought the boss was taking her words a little wrong, and she emphasized that the boss should let her know if he needed help. He might need Bonnie soon enough after all. Puzzled, he asked if Bonnie would be free this weekend. "Oh, of course, what's the matter?" The girl was happy that she could be of some help to her boss. She wanted to know what he wanted as soon as possible. So the boss asked Bonnie out. Wow, how she'd dreamed of that. What would Bonnie say about going to El Paso? Of course, Bonnie adored that city, so she immediately agreed. However, it was worth realizing that El Paso was far away, and it would take a long time to get there and back. Based on this reasoning, the boss suggested an overnight trip. Did he say sleepover? Did Bonnie not hear that? Catching the girl's surprised look, the boss suggested that Bonnie might decline if it was too much for her. But Bonnie exclaimed that she liked the idea and was in favor. Whether it was 2 nights or 10, it wasn't too much. Bonnie, in anticipation of the upcoming trip, animatedly remembered that a friend of hers in El Paso was in the rental business, and he could try to find a good place for them to stay. Also on Insta, she had recently found hostel options and could find a hotel. Bonnie was so happy that she talked without shutting up. The boss, on the other hand, simply said that any place would work for him, adding that he wasn't planning on sleeping there. Did he really mean the sequel to that failed first date? At work, Bonnie eagerly looked at the dates in her weekly planner. This weekend her dreams would have to come true. The girl had marked this special weekend for her with a whole bunch of red hearts and a D. How she can't wait for this trip to happen sooner rather than later. Getting carried away, Bonnie didn't notice Nelson, who was looking curiously at the date marked on her calendar. "And what are you doing on this day? How many hearts have you drawn?" he blurted out in surprise to Bonnie. Bonnie audibly resented this sudden appearance of his. Nelson, however, claimed that he was just waiting for the right moment to say hello. Leaning against the partition, Nelson continued to ask the girl if she was going on a trip with her lover. God, was he really eavesdropping? Bonnie tensed. Nelson had envisioned Bonnie's breakup with her lover, seeing her drooping these past few days. He couldn't resist expressing those assumptions to Bonnie. As he left, he said that he was so eager to take that chance, and he was sorry that his assumptions were wrong. At that moment, Rachel entered the office. Everything she would have been interested in, Rachel had time to hear and take in. Was Mr. Nelson interested in Bonnie, too? Tapping her heels, she walked to her workstation, meeting Bonnie's eyes. The girls greeted each other. Bonnie remembered what her ex had said yesterday about her coworker telling him everything. The girl was bothered by those words, so she checked the attendance records. And the last person to leave was exactly Rachel. What on earth did she want with Bonnie? Suddenly, Bonnie called out to Rachel. Alarmed, Rachel turned around. Bonnie asked if Rachel could spare some of her time. Bonnie had been very determined lately. In a confident tone, Bonnie asked Rachel what she had said to Colin Garris, whom she had met with yesterday. Rachel pretended not to know what she was talking about. Bonnie clarified that Rachel had been the last person to leave the office, clarifying that Colin had mentioned talking to someone at the company. Bonnie reiterated her question, sternly adding that if Colin had met with someone from the company, it had most likely been Rachel. Feigning innocence, Rachel tried to convince Bonnie that she'd misunderstood. She rebuked Bonnie for trying to corner her without any evidence. Turning around, Rachel got ready to leave, but Bonnie wasn't finished yet. Following Rachel, she added that if the reason for her actions was because she was interested in her boss, then Rachel should stop all this. The girl paused for a second. Why would that be? Rachel wondered. What kind of personality is this Rachel? Bonnie looked at her expectantly. Rachel turned to Bonnie, noting that surely Bonnie must have a special reason why she wouldn't want to lose her boss. The girl added with pride in her voice that Bonnie wasn't the only one who knew his secret. Rachel knew something about the boss too, so she wasn't about to give up. The boss's secret? Bonnie looked at Rachel with a puzzled look and said that Joni Moore's boss and she were in a relationship. She didn't want Rachel to find out, and now she was just giving it away. Rachel laughed scornfully, wryly noting that they weren't married, just dating, and added that the one who gets it last will be the winner in the end. Taking a theatrical breath and covering her mouth with her hand, Rachel asked if Bonnie was afraid. She told Bonnie that she thought she was much prettier and more charming than she was. Rachel thought that fact was a good reason for Bonnie to fear that the boss wouldn't choose her. After a little thought, Bonnie smiled. After all, there had been a time when she had actually thought that. Rachel looked simply gorgeous in Bonnie's eyes, and she thought he looked good next to her. Now, however, after what he had told her yesterday, and after she had trusted him completely, Bonnie's opinion had changed. The boss asked Bonnie to trust him as much as he trusted her, and the girl felt she could do that. After thinking about it, Bonnie confidently stated that it bothered her that Miss Rachel would take senseless action, but Bonnie couldn't even think that Rachel would misunderstand that. Rachel boiled over, nervously asking Bonnie what Bonnie meant. Bonnie, however, simply replied that if Rachel was so eager to seduce her boss, she could do as she pleased. At that moment, Bonnie was more proud than ever that she could say that. The feelings for her boss were making her all the stronger. Bonnie headed for the exit, and as she passed, Rachel lastly added that no matter what she did, there was no way the boss would buy it. After saying that, Bonnie walked out, slamming the door so hard that Rachel's ears rang. Yeah, who the hell did she think she was, Bonnie? Rachel was dumbfounded. She swore after the girl who had left. Rachel's self-esteem was now literally stomped into the dirt. For a while, Rachel thought back to what Bonnie had said. She was annoyed by the girl's sudden confidence. There was no way she was going to let herself be humiliated like that. In her mind, Rachel traveled back in time. Bonnie must have known her before. Rachel had once had a completely different name, and even a completely different appearance. Images from the past flashed through Rachel's mind. What could have happened in the past that Rachel hated Bonnie so much? Rachel's only goal now was to keep the two of them apart. She nervously pondered the fact that this was her only chance, remembering that there was another person who shared a common goal with Rachel. A person who hoped the two would break up. Meanwhile, the workday continued. Bonnie was desperately searching for something on her work computer. Strange. Just yesterday, her report was in a folder on her desktop. Bonnie was sure she had saved it there. God, now the folder was empty. Even the backup copy was gone. Bonnie was thrown into a chill. There was no way she'd accidentally deleted it. The girl was utterly desperate. What was she going to do now? She had promised to send that document today, hadn't she? Bonnie said something quietly to herself. Rachel, meanwhile, was sitting at her desk, smirking. I guess that person had a hand in this too. It was evening. The workday was over. Bonnie was in a wild panic. She was in tears, angry with herself, not knowing where the file with the report had gone. When the boss found out this afternoon, he was just as surprised. But despite that, he still extended the appointment until Monday afternoon. But Bonnie has a date this weekend. Oh, what's she gonna do now? So there's no choice but to finish this report today. I got a call from my boss. He asked if Bonnie was still in the office. Hearing that she was still there, and assuming that Bonnie had a lot of work left to do, the boss said he would be right over to the office. To which Bonnie replied that she shouldn't, since she was almost done. The boss worried about whether the girl had had dinner, promising to pick her up in about 30 minutes. Bonnie assured him that she'd already had a bite to eat, and she had a meeting scheduled with a friend later, so he shouldn't come. Thinking that her boss must be tired after working long hours outside the office, Bonnie asked him not to worry about her and to rest. With that, the girl wished him a happy journey, promising that they would see him tomorrow. The clock mercilessly showed 5 minutes to 11. Just a couple more hours and Bonnie planned to be done. Straightening her back, the girl stretched tiredly. Just when she thought it would be a good idea to run to the convenience store beforehand, her phone rang. "Boss? Yes?" Despite the phone, Bonnie asked mechanically. But contrary to expectation, it was Nelson calling. God, what did he want at this late hour? His call surprised Bonnie very much. She wondered if something was wrong. Nelson, asking if Bonnie had a few minutes to spare, said he had something urgent to discuss with Bonnie. He seemed to be troubled about something. Bonnie didn't really want to be alone with the man, so she apologized, citing that she had a lot of work to do and it wasn't a good time to meet. However, Nelson stated that he wanted to talk to her about the boss, and Bonnie needed to know that. The words about the boss couldn't leave Bonnie indifferent. What if what he was about to tell her had something to do with Rachel's words about some secret of the boss? Nelson, meanwhile, was already waiting for Bonnie at one of the tables in the cafe. He had some kind of pill in his hands, and the guy was looking at it, thinking about something. Looks like this guy's up to something. Finally, he noticed Bonnie enter the cafe. Seeing her, he quickly pocketed that mysterious pill. Looking at a worried Bonnie, he jokingly asked if she had run. Bonnie indignantly said that she thought he had something urgent for her. Nelson snarkily clarified that it was because she was in such a hurry because it concerned the boss. Then he added that Bonnie wasn't at all good at hiding her feelings. What secret relationship could even be talked about then? Bonnie tried to brush it off, awkwardly making excuses. But it was too late. Nelson emphasized that he had figured it out long ago. From the look in his and his boss's eyes, it was hard not to realize it. Bonnie was worried, wondering if the other employees had guessed it too. But Nelson was pretty sure no one else knew about it. And Nelson was able to notice it because he always looks at Bonnie. Thinking about it, the guy reassured the girl that he wouldn't tell anyone about it. Because even if he did start a rumor about Bonnie's relationship with the boss, the only loser from it would be himself. "I'm curious about something," Nelson said with a puzzled look at the girl. "What exactly do you like about the boss?" he finished. Bonnie wondered. God, why was he asking that? Nelson was begging Bonnie to tell him, after which he would be able to tell her what he wanted to tell her too. And Bonnie started by saying that what first attracted her to her boss was his incredibly handsome body. Oh God, at the mere memory of his sculpted muscles, Bonnie was beginning to melt. Nelson was shocked by this for some reason. He commented that he hadn't expected Bonnie to be interested in that particular thing at all. Bonnie explained that at first she had denied her feelings, repeating to herself that there was no way she would fall in love with her boss. However, the more she suppressed them, the stronger they became. Eventually, Bonnie started thinking about her boss every day. And eventually, she was able to realize that she didn't just like his body, but he himself, just the way he was. Smiling, Bonnie concluded her story by saying that she just wanted Joni more. And now she didn't care what the boss looked like. It wasn't the most important thing to her anymore. Nelson looked surprised. He asked, could Bonnie really like the boss, regardless of his looks or his skeletons in the closet? Bonnie nodded confidently. Yes, she would want him no matter what. Nelson reasoned aloud. What if the boss has a belly like Matthew's manager, or it turns out that his family is extremely poor and he's got tons of debt? Bonnie countered that body imperfections could always be corrected with sports, and as for poverty, she had no right to judge that. Nelson gave Bonnie a sly look. From the look on his face, he had another trump card up his sleeve. After a brief pause, Nelson asked Bonnie a question. What if the boss isn't at all who you think he is? At the same time, the boss was already home. He was enjoying his vacation, sitting on his couch. The silence was broken by a phone call. The boss had not expected such a late call, much less from Rachel. She informed the boss that she had something urgent for him. Rachel intrigued the man by saying that she didn't want to contact him about something like this. However, she had to say it. The boss excitedly asked what was wrong. Rachel began to tell him something very quietly. At this time, she was standing outside the motel. The boss listened to the girl in some incomprehensible stupor. Oh, what was Rachel up to? What had she done to alarm the man so much? At last, he simply asked, "Where is this place?" As it turns out, Rachel had a plan, and she'd called her boss to report that she'd seen Miss Bonnie and Mr. Nelson enter the motel. A little while after talking to the boss, Rachel sent a text message to Nelson, indicating that the boss would be there soon. In 20 minutes, she promised to knock on the door, so she told the guy to get ready. Nelson replied that everything was going according to plan. In the meantime, sat at the hotel reception. Ah, what a great idea it was to use Nelson. Rachel was pleased with herself and smiled in anticipation of the upcoming meeting. How pleased she was with herself that she had managed to think this through so perfectly. After Rachel realized that Nelson liked Bonnie, she decided that he would help implement a plan to get her. He would meet her and slip her sleeping pills. Then Nelson had to end up with Bonnie at a motel. Next, he had to stage a scene so that his boss, seeing all this, would believe that his Bonnie was cheating on him. Then, feeling betrayed, he would lose his trust in Bonnie, and Rachel would finally be able to have him. Ha ha! The girl laughed evilly, now almost completely convinced that these two wouldn't last long. Not too long ago, Rachel had met a man by chance at a bar she frequented. He turned out to be a representative of the American branch of the production company Menson, as well as a cousin of the chairman of the main branch. After a good drink, the man told Rachel one of the company's secrets. Rachel learned that the chairman's youngest son worked at the main branch, but no one knew of his existence because he never showed up in the media. It was then that an idea came into Rachel's mind that could get her out of this poor and tedious life. If she could marry the chairman's youngest son, that and the Manson Food Company could also be hers. So, she seduced the chairman's cousin and blackmailed her into a spot on the planning team of that branch. And on the first day, Rachel immediately realized everything. The man who had been living abroad had returned to Dallas a year ago and had already taken over the management position at a young age. This was the same man who can't hide his beauty, which overwhelms him from head to toe. Meanwhile, the boss arrived at the motel. Upon seeing Rachel, he immediately asked her where Bonnie was. Apologizing for bothering him on such an occasion, Rachel informed him that the two were now on the 7th floor, noting also that she had secretly checked which room they had gone to just in case. Rachel skillfully manipulated her boss's feelings, sighing naively and bewildered. She asked her boss to leave them alone and talk about it another time, for there was no telling what those two might have been doing in there. Rachel was well aware that those words would only irritate the man more. Rachel was right. The boss, saying he wanted to see everything with his own eyes, entered the elevator. So expected. And who would want to wait quietly when the betrayal of his beloved was happening right in front of his eyes? And how can he keep calm and remain so amazing even in this situation? Rachel wondered. But why Bonnie in particular? Rachel was sure that after finding out who the boss really was, Bonnie would definitely not want to let him go. Thinking about all of this, Rachel spoke to the boss. She explained that she knew that the boss was in a relationship with Bonnie. At the same time, she emphasized that Bonnie had told her not to bother her boss since they started dating. The girl also added that she wasn't going to bother them, but her feelings for her boss are genuine. The boss seemed to not listen to her at all. The elevator went up to the 7th floor. Rachel wanted to say something else, but the boss interrupted her, asking her to show her where that room was. Rachel didn't hesitate to point her finger to the right door. Yes, definitely in that room. Rachel was sure everything should be ready by now. Nelson's head is thinking as well as Rachel's, so he should be able to do a good job on his own. And if anyone suspected anything amiss, she'd just blame it on him. They knocked on the suite. The door slowly opened. Bonnie stood in front of them. She was agitated but not frightened by their arrival. For a moment, it even looked like the girl had been expecting them. Oh, Rachel, did something not go according to plan? Rachel whirled past the bewildered Bonnie, yelling across the room. Where are you hiding, Nelson? Nelson? I was alone in the room, Bonnie said in surprise. Rachel stood in the middle of the room, wondering how she was going to get out of this now. The boss didn't wait for Rachel to come up with another lie and asked why she did it. Rachel went back to pretending to be an innocent sheep, assuring her boss that she had called him here because she was worried. She indignantly asked if they thought she had done it. Rachel then began to prevaricate, turning the tables on Bonnie. She speculated aloud that Nelson must have left first, or else why would Bonnie come alone to the motel? Rachel declared that Bonnie was being deliberately evasive because she'd been caught red-handed. Bonnie, who had been silent until then, angrily said, "Wait a minute. Mr. Nelson told me everything, and first of all, he had no intention of helping you." Then, in the cafe, asking Bonnie what if the boss wasn't who he said he was, he added what would happen if the boss was actually the son of an oil magnate or the heir to a conglomerate. Bonnie replied that it was something out of the realm of the impossible, and she hadn't even thought about it. Nelson asked if Bonnie was sure that even knowing that, her feelings for her boss wouldn't change. At that moment, he apparently really wanted to know how strong the girl's feelings for her boss were. Nelson probably already knew the answer anyway. When Bonnie took the glass, he said that it would be better if the girl didn't drink it. Nelson admitted that he had put something in it. Bonnie was shocked by this confession. Then, she learned that he had a plan to get her drunk on sleeping pills that Nelson had pre-slipped before Bonnie arrived. If he hadn't stopped her then, she would have fallen soundly asleep after drinking it. Nelson made no secret of the fact that he wanted to bring a sleeping Bonnie to the motel and show Johnny Moore that they were together. Bonnie didn't understand what it all meant, or what made the guy decide to do something like that. Ah, what a trap Bonnie could have fallen into. Nelson explained that he and Rachel were going to make it look like Bonnie was cheating on her boss. However, he decided that he would not stoop to such a dirty deed, even though Bonnie liked him very much. After his confession, Nelson suggested Bonnie to go to the motel right now. If they wait a little while, the boss and that woman should arrive soon. Ha, what was he talking about now anyway? Bonnie demanded an explanation with all her looks. Nelson asked Bonnie to just trust him, and not to be afraid of anything. After such a confession, Bonnie just couldn't help being afraid. However, Nelson assured that he wouldn't let anything happen that would hurt Bonnie. The girl decided to trust him. After telling the whole story, Bonnie gleefully turned to Rachel. "You wanted to separate the boss and me using such a cowardly method? Whatever Miss Rachel's plan is, it's a crime. You have crossed a line that is not allowed." Thoughts were rushing convulsively through Rachel's mind. Nelson, he was going to expose her from the beginning. Bonnie, however, added that Nelson had promised to turn over all the evidence to the police, and so Rachel would be better off admitting her misconduct. "What misdemeanor?" she muttered through gritted teeth. She exclaimed indignantly that she had done nothing wrong, and who wouldn't want to take that chance? Rachel justified herself by saying that she just wanted to start a new, better life by meeting a good person. "The one who's awful is you, Bonnie," Rachel said angrily. She rebuked the girl that even now Bonnie was looking at her with the same eyes she had before. "You always laughed at me, sympathized with me, and thought I was nothing," Rachel continued. After those words, she grabbed Bonnie's shoulders, digging her fingers into them like claws into prey. Rachel started shaking the girl, yelling that people like Bonnie were making her feel bad. "That's enough," the boss said sternly and pulled the distraught Rachel's hands away from Bonnie. Glaring angrily at Rachel, still not letting go of her hand, the boss asked if she couldn't see how hard it was for him to hold back right now. Rachel's voice began to shake. The principal also remarked that she should be glad that Nelson had betrayed her, clarifying that if things had ended the way Rachel had planned, her life would have ended right there. At that moment, the boss had a look in his eyes that seemed capable of destroying with one such look. He flung away Rachel's hand that he had been holding until now. The girl looked at him with an undisguised sense of fear. The night city still glittered with light in the windows of the high-rise buildings. The police department accepted citizen inquiries at all hours of the day and night. Bonnie walked out of the building where Nelson was waiting for her. He expressed sympathy that the girl had been through a lot today. The guy noted that once the allegations were confirmed, Miss Rachel wouldn't escape punishment. Bonnie thanked the boyfriend, emphasizing that Rachel could still make sure that Nelson was the only one left in the situation. "But why did you help me?" asked Bonnie. After a little thought, Nelson replied that he owed something to a cold-hearted guy with a perpetually disgruntled grimace. Is he talking about the boss by any chance? The guy added that he hadn't even considered taking Bonnie away from the man at first. Yeah, he's definitely talking about Joni, Nelson continued, explaining that the two of them were acting so stubborn that he just decided to help them out. Bonnie said that she didn't understand him, to which Nelson replied that she didn't have to. He did it because he just wanted to. Afterward, he advised Bonnie to hurry up. I sense someone's evil stare, so intimidating that I can't talk to Bonnie anymore, Nelson said, smiling as he said goodbye to Bonnie. His gut really didn't let him down. The boss was standing in the back near his car. The boss told them to hurry up. They said goodbye and agreed to meet on Monday. In the car, Bonnie sat slumped, thinking about something. She couldn't get out of her head what Rachel had said about how her eyes hadn't changed and how Bonnie had once laughed at her. Who are you, Miss Rachel? How could Bonnie possibly know her? Apparently there was a reason Rachel had seemed so familiar to her when they first met. The boss felt as if he understood the girl's feelings now, so he decided to reassure Bonnie by pointing out that it was just a lust for revenge. Bonnie didn't need to feel sorry for her. Bonnie did not deny that Rachel should be punished. However, that realization in no way spared the girl from thinking about those words of Rachel's. Why on earth had she said that to her? Oh, it couldn't be. The image of the little girl suddenly surfaced clearly in Bonnie's mind. She seemed to remember at last. Bonnie remembered that Rachel was in her senior year of junior high school. The boss was surprised that if they were old acquaintances, how could she do something like that? Boss asked the girl to stop thinking about her. He felt that he shouldn't sympathize with her, just because she had once been Bonnie's friend. After a little thought, Bonnie agreed. And really, should she think about anyone else when her lover was around? Thoughts of Rachel slowly began to drift away. Bonnie glanced suspiciously at her boss. There was one question that Bonnie wanted to know the answer to. The girl turned to her boss, asking if he was the illegitimate son of some oil tycoon or the heir to a conglomerate. And you want any of that to be true? The boss smilingly answered question for question. Oh no, that wasn't what Bonnie meant, was it? However, the boss was surprised by this unexpected question. Bonnie blushed awkwardly, trying to justify herself somehow. Only she didn't do a very good job of it either. After some thought, the boss replied that he didn't have such a great origin story. From what he could tell, Boss grew up without a father, and his mother was a single mom. When Joni grew older, the two of them and his mother moved abroad. Joni noted that he grew up without needing anything, as his mother's business brought in a good income. However, before that move, he also had a hard time, just like Bonnie. And Joni's mother, he said, had suffered much more than he had. Bonnie wondered where the boss's mother was now. As soon as Joni got older, his mother went traveling. At first, he had tried to stop her, warning her of the dangers of traveling alone, but he soon realized it was for her good. Seems like a cool life your mother has, Bonnie remarked. Johnny, on the other hand, was daring to tell someone about his family for the first time. Smiling, he apologized if he had upset Bonnie by not turning out to be the heir to the conglomerate. Oh, because Bonnie thought the boss had been born into a well-to-do family and didn't need anything. It must have been hard on the boss and his mother. Perhaps his decision to remain chaste until marriage had been influenced by those life circumstances. Bonnie wanted to know more about him, as much as possible so he could rely on her. She wanted their relationship to become more serious. Suddenly, the boss noticed that their conversation was lingering, offering Bonnie a ride home. Oh no, she didn't want to go home. Bonnie pulled him back. Gently touching her boss's arm, she reminded him of his own words about being willing to go anywhere. So right now she wanted to go to his house. They pulled up to a tall, high-rise apartment building. The boss politely invited Bonnie in. Bonnie expressed something to her boss before entering his apartment. She reflected on the fact that the man had opened up to her today, sacrificed a lot, and accepted a lot in Bonnie. However, she realized that Boss was a man who couldn't trust his body or his heart unless he was sure that they would be together forever. It was exciting for Bonnie to say this, however, she still made up her mind. The girl stated that after meeting her boss, her values have changed a lot. However, even saying it in that way still didn't mean that she considered the wedding a necessity. She still couldn't promise him that they would get married. But she could promise her boss that she would never leave him. Ah, how hard it was for her to put her feelings into words. Bonnie added that even if not through marriage, she would try to stay with him in any way she could. The girl promised to love him tomorrow, more than today, and the day after tomorrow and beyond. Her love will not fade or change. The man I love and will go forward for will be only you." Bonnie finished her speech, hoping she was able to convey what was in her heart and soul. After those words, she finally walked in. Bonnie took her boss's hand in her own. Looking him straight in the eye, she told him that the boss could stop worrying and just hug her. "Are you worried about me?" the boss inquired. Puzzled by his question, Bonnie tried to explain to him that if the boss wanted to remain chaste until the wedding. The boss didn't let the girl finish her sentence, suddenly picking her up in his arms. Ah, how unpredictable is sometimes this man. Pulling the girl closer to him, the boss pointed out that she had misunderstood, emphasizing that the only person to worry about was Bonnie herself. And even if she passed out from fever again tonight, the boss had no intention of backing down. Despite her wishes, the boss's words made the girl a little red in the face. But still, she was over the moon. This was exactly what she was so eager to hear. Closing her eyes, she leaned down to kiss the boss. The boss thought he was going to lose his mind. The desire to possess Bonnie was driving the man insane. Taking off his shirt and throwing the girl on the bed, he hovered over her, voicing his desires aloud. The boss admitted that he had imagined it dozens, no, even hundreds of times. Saying this, he pulled the drawstring on Bonnie's blouse. A small part of her beautiful body revealed itself to the boss's gaze. He leaned right up to her face, warning her that he might not be able to stop. Ah, yes, Bonnie didn't want him to stop. The girl ran her hand gently down his muscular arm. Looking at Bonnie teasingly, he asked her to tell him if the girl suddenly changed her mind, but those words only turned her on more. After that, he leaned right to her very lips and whispered that he didn't know if he could stop. A new day of work came. All morning, Bonnie had been yawning desperately, unable to stop. I guess it had been a good night after all? Gemma, passing by, couldn't help but notice, so she asked Bonnie if she'd gotten a good night's sleep. Bonnie replied that she hadn't. A co-worker mentioned that she knew about that lost file, noting that Bonnie seemed to be spending too much time recovering it. Gemma recommended that the girl at least get some rest. But of course, the file wasn't the cause of her sleepless night. Thinking back to that night, Bonnie was just beyond happy. Yes, it had finally happened. Bonnie had a hard time even believing it. How could the boss have put up with all this time? Now the girl felt a little guilty for doubting his manhood along with Kelly. Her memories of the stormy night were interrupted by the thought that right now Rachel was supposed to be in the boss's office. She was. Rachel was in his office right in front of the boss's desk. There was a serious conversation to be had. The boss remarked in a chagrined tone that in addition to Rachel's planned crime last night, she seemed to have done other things that violated company rules. Lowering her gaze, Rachel said she didn't know what he was talking about. Well, yeah, of course that's what she was led to believe. The boss explained to the girl that the security cameras clearly showed that Rachel had been at Miss Bonnie's desk for extended periods of time on several occasions. In a peremptory tone, as if a detective, the boss asked, "Is it true that Miss Rachel deleted Miss Bonnie's work file?" The girl realized that the cameras certainly couldn't have caught her deleting the document. Oh, and it was unlikely that he would have known that Rachel had learned the password during her meeting with Colin Garris. Realizing this, the girl was sure that her guilt could not be supported by anything evidentiary. Smiling, Rachel declared that she hadn't done it. The boss calmly warned that the incident would be dealt with by company security and the police. Rachel's guilt would be proven based on evidence and testimony. The boss also added that once that happened, Rachel would receive the full punishment prescribed by law. Rachel was outraged that the boss wouldn't take her at her word. She began to accuse Bonnie of just pretending to be in front of everyone, and Rachel's only sin was being caught up in her deception. God, what is she talking about? The only people who deserve to be punished are Miss Bonnie and Mr. Nelson. Rachel couldn't help herself. She was still trying to extricate herself from the situation she was already in. The boss had had enough of these worthless attempts to justify himself. He stood up from his desk and pointed out that Rachel still didn't seem to realize her mistake. The boss moved closer to her, but Rachel took a step back. The boss hoped Rachel would get the punishment she deserved, and if not, he would do anything to make it happen. Slamming the door shut, Rachel stormed out of her boss's office. A feeling of rage and resentment simultaneously shrouded her eyes. Ha! She was just furious. Rachel would never forgive Nelson for this. With these thoughts, she went to Nelson's workplace, expecting to find him there. However, it was empty. Where is he during working hours? He wasn't on the roof of the office building either. Rachel looked in the break room as well and walked through the other areas, but Nelson was nowhere to be found. God, it was like he'd gone underground. Rachel was outraged. Already on her way out of the office, she noticed the familiar silhouette of a blonde-haired guy. Oh, finally. Freeze! The girl yelled like a crazy person. Nelson turned at that yell, not expecting it to be addressed to him. Rachel clutched her hand into the sleeve of Nelson's shirt, indignantly asking how he could do this to her. She didn't understand why the guy had accepted her offer if he wasn't going to go through with the plan. How could he betray Rachel? It was as simple as that. If Nelson hadn't accepted, she would have offered it to another man. And Nelson couldn't let that happen, which was why he had to accept her offer. The guy said he just couldn't stand seeing Bonnie sad. Rachel angrily questioned what he had just said, to which Nelson replied that if he had taken care of the people who were hurting Bonnie sooner, then he wouldn't have had to worry so much. The guy genuinely couldn't understand what Rachel was thinking, trusting him with a case like that. He finally unhooked the girl's hand from his shirt and asked her to excuse him, citing that he was a bit busy, but Rachel, like a tick, clung to his sleeve again. God, she's restless. Rachel gritted her teeth angrily. Do you think I'm going to be the one to deal with this? And then she added that if she went down, he would follow. Rachel pointed out to the guy that she and he were in the same boat, and if Nelson didn't want to lose, he should come to his senses now. She threatened that she would pull him with her at all costs. After the threats, the requests began. The girl asked him to tell people that it was all a misunderstanding. Wasn't that where she should have started? Nelson just smiled and wished Rachel luck, noting that if she wished to put him down, she could try anything she wanted. Yeah, how dare he even talk to her like that? Rachel didn't understand where it was that he was suddenly so confident. At that moment, Nelson leaned closer to Rachel, threatening that the more trouble she gave him, the harder her life would be. What? How was he going to do that? Wait! Rachel called out to the departing guy. She seemed to realize what a mistake she had made. Pale with surprise, and at the same time the realization that had just come to her, she blurted out, President Manson's son I was looking for? Smiling sweetly, Nelson uttered, Oh, I think you get it now. I think I'll put in a good word with human resources for you for that. Evening, at Johnny Moore's house. Bonnie is sitting at her laptop doing a bunch of overtime work. She's so tired already today. And why does she have to work overtime again, even though it was never on her priority list? Bonnie knew the answer. It was just that someone had dozed off during the day and ended up not getting their work done. And why would Bonnie be so tired that she fell asleep in the middle of the workday? Oh yes, the reason she was so tired was sitting in her robe right in front of her, her torso open and reading a book. At the office, he'd said he'd help her, so Bonnie had to come to his house. But was he really sure he was helping me? Sitting across from me, half covered by his robe, showing off his divine body? This was insanely distracting to Bonnie, and she asked if the boss could wear something else. But the boss was undeterred, noting, couldn't he wear what he wanted in his own home? And he was damn right. Bonnie couldn't find anything to say in response to that. Trying to dive into her work, the girl convinced herself that the boss was invisible, that he was an invisible man. Meanwhile, it was already without a few minutes past midnight. Scratching her arms, Bonnie stretched tiredly and yawned. The boss inquired if she wanted to go to bed. Bonnie replied, Yes, a little. This job was really tiring her out. The boss approached Bonnie from behind and, taking her by the shoulders, offered to give her a massage. Bonnie tried to object, noting that she was fine. However, the boss asked that she be allowed to do at least that. After all, he had promised to help her stay awake until she finished her work. So the boss began kneading her shoulders. Bonnie, feeling blissful, noted that it was very invigorating after all. It felt so good on her tired shoulders. Before Bonnie could stretch her shoulders properly, the boss leaned over to the girl, whispering in her ear that he knew a more effective method of getting rid of her drowsiness. Shall I tell you? He added. Without waiting for an answer, the boss put his arms around the girl's waist from behind, pulling her closer. Bonnie started to resist, saying she was fine, and her sleepiness suddenly evaporated. You can't do this now. Not until after the report is complete, the girl resented. Let's switch to more important matters, coaxed the boss. However, for Bonnie, the report was just that, A very important matter. She had to finish it so she could go on a weekend trip with her boss. But how hard it was for her to resist after all. Oh, because today was just about to be the first day off. Realizing this, Bonnie panicked. She wanted to say something, but her boss covered her mouth with a hard kiss. Bonnie froze in surprise. Those lips could make a girl forget everything in the world. She was still trying to pull away from him, but it was no use. The sweet kiss seemed to last forever. Bonnie knew she shouldn't, but this man drove her crazy. And gently wrapping her arms around his neck, she was completely captivated by her body's desires. That's how they spent 2 days at home. In the end, she and her boss decided to cancel their 3-day trip and stay home. And during those days, they had never once regretted that decision. The sound of the door opening woke the sleeping Bonnie. It was the boss. He entered the room wearing an apron, wondering if Bonnie had slept well. Surprisingly, Bonnie had never seen the boss sleeping in the last 2 days. The girl was curious where he gets such stamina from. Or maybe the boss takes some kind of vitamins. The boss objected, noting that unless he had important plans for the day, he preferred to work out. Bonnie felt a little defeated and wondered how anyone could work out every day. The man decided to ask until when Bonnie planned to keep calling him boss, to which Bonnie replied that it had become a habit, and she called him that unconsciously. Boss reminded her that he has a name after all, asking her to call him by his first name when he and Bonnie are alone together. "Sure, Bo." Bonnie wanted to call him boss again, but immediately corrected herself, smiling sweetly, repeating, "Sure, Joni." Bonnie was hungry after her nap, so she was interested in the question, what would they have for breakfast? Bonnie offered to cook something together, but the boss objected that he would do everything himself, sending the girl to take a shower. Joni started cooking by cutting vegetables. Was there anything in the world more beautiful than a man cooking breakfast for his beloved? God, the man was beautiful even in a kitchen apron. Bonnie couldn't get enough of him when she got out of the shower. What was wrong with him? He didn't seem to have a single flaw. As she toweled her hair, she was mentally glad she'd gotten Johnny. While Bonnie was looking at Johnny, he suddenly remembered that they were short on some of the food for what he was going to make. Probably need to make a quick trip to the store to get them. Bonnie wanted to offer to go get them herself, but the boss waved off that the store was nearby, and he would quickly run out on his own. Bonnie would just have to wait a little longer. Left alone in the kitchen, Bonnie looked around and wondered, should she at least slice the cucumbers? Thinking that it all looked now as if she and her boss were newlyweds, the girl put on an apron. She couldn't stand idly by until Joni returned. She decided to slice the cucumbers after all. In the process, she was carried away by thoughts of what she and Joni could cook if they were married. On weekdays, they'd probably share a car to work and take the same car home. Tossing a sliced cucumber onto her plate, Bonnie imagined that she and Johnny would have a peaceful married life. After all, he was good at cooking, and Bonnie was good at cleaning. And when she was tired, she would spend all day at home doing absolutely nothing. Engrossed in her thoughts, Bonnie didn't immediately notice that the idea of marriage no longer made her as uncomfortable as it once had. Could it be that Johnny was having such an effect on her thoughts? Smiling, Bonnie caught herself thinking that she was enjoying just thinking about their supposed family. Bonnie suddenly heard someone walk in. Oh, and Joni really came back quickly, Bonnie thought. Bonnie looked out of the kitchen, expecting to find Joni there. However, he wasn't there. "Surprise!" some woman unfamiliar to Bonnie exclaimed happily. Oh, what a surprise indeed. Such a surprise. Neither had expected to see anyone but Joni here now. They stood looking at each other for a while in a stupor. Then they asked the same question at the same time. "Who are you?"